Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a little stroll through the damp, creaky floors of the medieval imagination where monsters lurk in shadows. Sure, but something else causes more daily panic mice. Yes, you heard that right. Not dragons, not ogres, mice. The ones with the twitchy noses and beady eyes that still haunt your pantry today. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to comment your time zone and what hour you're listening from. I love knowing where in the sleepy world you're tuning in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a medieval cottage. The walls are made of wattle and daub, which is a fancy historical term for mud and twigs, pretending to be architecture. The roof leaks just enough to keep your socks permanently damp. And in the corner, by the barley sack, you see it. A blur, a twitch, a mouse. Your neighbor's voice from 2 huts down hisses in the wind. That's not just any mouse. That one carries whispers of the dead. You sigh. It's going to be one of those nights. Mice, you see, aren't just pests in your little village. They're omens. They carry plague, yes, but also curses, spells, and apparently messages from that one relative who died after eating a suspiciously green pie. The fear of rodents wasn't entirely unjustified. The Black Death is still a distant hum in your mind, or maybe not that distant. People whisper about entire villages silenced by a single flea bite. And because germ theory hasn't RSVP'd to the 14th century yet, you and everyone else believe the mouse is the true villain, not the flea, which makes sense. It's bigger. It has a tail. It chews your socks. In your village, the appearance of a mouse inside the home meant someone had to sleep outside that night. You know, just in case it came with something extra. And some households even had mouse charms, tiny iron figures placed in corners of the house to ward off the spirits the mice supposedly carried. Because nothing says effective ghost trap like a lump of metal shaped like the problem itself. There's also the curious case of the mouse cure. According to some folk beliefs, catching a mouse and placing it in a jar with ashes from a funeral pyre could cure toothache if you shake it just right. And no, I didn't make that up. Medieval medicine walked so modern pseudoscience could run. Your grandmother, who lives in a thatched hut with 9 cats and claims she speaks the language of firewood, insists that the clicking sound in your ceiling isn't mice. It's the ghost of a mouse that died mid-message. The only way to set it free is to burn rosemary at dawn while singing the second verse of a hymn that nobody remembers anymore. You try it anyway, the clicking stops. You're now either a powerful healer or just out of mice. But of course, there's a deeper layer to all of this. The real fear isn't the mouse itself. It's what the mouse represents. It's the idea that your house, your tiny, smoky, goat-smelling hut, is no longer safe. A mouse can slip in through any crack. It can crawl over the cradle. It can eat your grains and your peace of mind. And in a world where security means one latch and a prayer, the mouse is the reminder that nothing is fully protected. Scholars today argue whether this intense rodent-based panic was purely fear of plague or more symbolic, a projection of larger anxieties, famine, invasion, sin. After all, the mouse creeps in, quietly steals in the dark, and multiplies rapidly, kind of like despair. Also kind of like your cousin Roland's opinions about herbal remedies. But that's a different story. And here's the fun bit. People wrote ballads about mice. One 13th century poem compares a knight's courage to a man who fears not even the rats of the granary, which I suppose was the medieval version of saying someone's got nerves of steel. or a broken sense of smell. One rather eccentric chronicle from Eastern Europe describes a mouse plague where townsfolk claimed mice were whispering secrets into the ears of sleeping villagers. People reported waking up knowing things they shouldn't, like who was stealing cheese, or who kissed who behind the chapel. This mass psychic mouse hysteria led to 3 weddings being canceled, 2 goats being baptized, and 1 very confused priest. Of course it's hard to verify. Records from the time are mostly someone's cousin writing on calfskin by candlelight after drinking a suspicious ale. But still, the fear was real. Tangible. The kind that lives in the quiet spaces between thoughts. You sleep on a straw mat tonight. You tuck your feet in tightly. The sack of grain is tied shut. The cat is curled near your head, which you find oddly comforting, even though she looks like she'd betray you for a sausage in a heartbeat. The night is still, but in the walls you hear it. Scratch, scratch, pause. It's just a mouse. Probably. Anyway, did you know some medieval towns outlawed keeping bread in bedrooms because they thought mice could bring plague straight to your lungs while you slept? Not because of mold, but because of mouse breath. Apparently nothing says pathogen like a rodent's whisper at midnight. So next time you see a mouse in a storybook wearing a hat and stirring tea, just remember your ancestors would have screamed, "Douse the house in vinegar," and moved 3 villages over. And that's just the beginning. Coming up next, we'll talk about how people feared the air itself. But first, quick quiz. What do mice ghosts and burnt rosemary have in common? Answer medieval sleep hygiene. The air feels heavy tonight, doesn't it? Not in a spooky thunderstorm on the horizon way, but in that what if the air itself is trying to kill me way. Welcome to the medieval world of miasma, where people didn't fear what they could see like dragons or angry mobs, but what they couldn't, the smell of death on the wind. Hi again. You've just cracked the window of your tiny medieval home, hoping to catch a bit of a breeze. But your neighbor gasps so loudly, she drops her crucifix into the goat trough. Shut it. Don't you know what time it is? The air is moving. Before you settle in, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content here. And comment where you're listening from, hopefully somewhere with decent air circulation and less fear of invisible doom. Go ahead, lower the light switch on a gentle fan for some calming white noise, and let's begin our evening adventure. You're lying in bed, or rather, lying on a lump of hay, trying to believe it's a mattress when you feel it the wind. Cool, soft, and innocent. But in your century, that gentle night breeze is actually a suspect. You sit up straight, sniff cautiously, and then rush to light a bundle of herbs at your door. Because if you inhale the wrong molecule after sunset, you might die. Or worse, get the humors out of balance. See, people in the Middle Ages believed that bad air, or miasma, was the root of disease. Not bacteria, not viruses, just funky smells. And it made a kind of terrifying sense. You'd walk by a swamp, wrinkle your nose, and boom, diarrhea for days. Someone gets sick after the harvest festival. Must be the smell of unwashed pilgrims, or that fish stand run by a guy named Gervais, who looks like he eats soap recreationally. Miasma wasn't just a theory, it was law. Cities regulated the removal of corpses, the timing of butchery. Even when people could sweep streets, there were actual curfews on smells. Imagine calling your landlord today and saying, "Hey, my neighbor's compost pile violated smell curfew last night, and now my humors are leaking." Even more fun, you and your fellow villagers hung bundles of dried lavender sage and sometimes socks near windows, hoping the pleasant scent would fight off the invisible death breeze. The logic was, if it smells nice, the air can't murder me. At hospitals, using that term generously, they would swing incense censers over patients, not to bless them, but to fight the air demons. And sure, maybe that helped a little. Or maybe it just made the rats smell like frankincense. Now here's the odd part. Miasma theory was global, not just Europe. In ancient China, India, Persia, people feared night air like it was a villain in a soap opera, which raises the academic debate. Was this a cross-cultural coincidence? Or did everyone just collectively agree that air shouldn't smell like boiled socks? Let's test it out. It's midnight. You wake up sweating because your straw roof now functions as a sauna. You unlatch the wooden shutter and a breath of wind snakes in. Cool, welcome, delicious. He and absolutely full of death, according to your aunt. So you scramble for your leather pouch of dried herbs, waving it around like a medieval air freshener. Your dog sneezes. You mutter a prayer and slam the window shut, sealing the bad air outside. But now you're stuck in a room with your brother's feet and the scent of boiled turnip stew. Either way, you lose. The town healer, by the way, wears a beak-shaped mask filled with spices to filter the air. And yes, this is centuries before COVID masks. You watch her strut past your cottage like a murderous duck, waving a stick, looking like she's in a low-budget horror musical. Fun detail, some people believed bells could vibrate miasma away. So villages rang bells during plagues, not just for mourning, but to chase away death itself with sound waves. Because nothing says healthcare like auditory combat. You try to sleep, but every little draft feels suspicious. You stuff rags in the cracks of the wall, toss a blanket over your face, and whisper to the cat, "If I die of a smell, avenge me." The cat blinks slowly. You're on your own. There's a record, probably exaggerated but too juicy not to mention, of a 14th century priest who refused to enter his own chapel for 3 months because he smelled something unholy near the altar. Turned out it was a dead squirrel under the floorboards. But still, he insisted the miasma had intentions. Scholars today debate whether miasma theory was harmful pseudoscience or a clever early attempt at environmental hygiene. After all, it did lead people to avoid swamps, clean filth, and burn things they probably should have burned anyway. Sure, the science was wobbly, but the instincts weren't always wrong. Kind of like medieval parenting advice. Don't let your kid drink pond water or they'll grow gills. Wrong reason, right result. Eventually, the window closes itself, probably just the wind. You breathe through your herbs, mutter 3 short prayers to St. Lupus the air freshener, and do your best to sleep. The room is still heavy with the scent of thyme and garlic smoke. But just before your eyes drift closed, you wonder, what if the air isn't trying to kill you? What if it's trying to tell you something? Then again, maybe it's just your cousin Roland, passing gas again. You're thirsty. Not I walked 5 miles through medieval dust, thirsty, but just a bit parched. The kind of thirst where a cool sip from the village well would do the trick. You grab your little wooden cup, slip on your boots, and step into the misty morning light. The village is still quiet, save for the occasional rooster who clearly has no respect for time zones. But something's wrong. Your neighbor Marjorie stands frozen near the well, clutching her apron like it's a holy relic. She points down into the stone mouth of the well and whispers, "The water's gone still." It's watching us again. You pause, then back away slowly. Because in this world, a quiet well isn't peaceful. It's ominous. Hi again. Tonight or this morning, depending on your time zone, we're diving into the deep echoing fears that medieval folks had about something we now consider harmless, a well. Yes, a literal hole in the ground filled with water. Welcome to another episode of Why Was Everything So Terrifying in the Middle Ages? So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from. Preferably not inside a cursed water source. Turn down the lights. Perhaps start a fan to create a soothing ambiance and join me as we slowly dive into tonight's story. Water is life, of course. But in the Middle Ages, people also thought it could carry spirits. Wells were often seen as magical portals, especially when they reflected the moon or echoed strangely. And if a village was particularly suspicious, which spoiler alert they all were, the well became a focal point of fear, blame, and occasionally rituals that involve sheep blood and very confused chickens. Let's say your cousin Bernadette gets sick. She was perfectly fine yesterday laughing over stale rye bread, and now she's shivering, muttering about the lady with moss in her hair. What's the first thing villagers suspect? That's right. Someone cursed the well. Your local priest, who also happens to be the best turnip farmer in town, leads a small group to inspect it. They toss in a blessed coin, recite 3 Hail Marys, and hope no frogs answer from the depths. Because if they do, that's a sign the water is being borrowed by unclean forces. Or possibly that it's just frog season. Now here's the wild part. People didn't always want to drink from the well directly. In some places, the first draw of water each day was discarded entirely. Just in case the spirits were still stretching or hadn't had their coffee yet. Only the second bucket was safe, and heaven forbid you let a mirror fall in. If a reflective object landed in the well, it was said to copy your soul and trap part of it. People would lower nets to fish out the reflection. Sometimes the net came up empty. Other times it came up full of frogs again. The frogs were probably just doing their job. But in this century, being a frog is a high-risk profession. There's even a charming belief in some regions that the well could judge your intentions. If you approach the well with pure thoughts, the water would be clear. But if your heart harbored deceit, like say, secretly wanting your neighbor's cow, the water would grow cloudy, or worse, bitter. How did they test for bitterness? By letting someone else drink it first. Classic academic debate brews around whether these well rituals were pagan traditions quietly living under the radar of Christianity, or if they were just practical folk customs with a lot of dramatic flair. Either way, people in the Middle Ages weren't just worried about bandits or war. They were worried that the well might be judging them. And then there's the wishing well paradox. Some wells were feared, others were adored. Villagers would toss in coins, jewelry, or buttons, whatever had sentimental value to ask for good harvests, healthy children, or just to make the frogs go away. These wells were usually associated with saints or fairy legends, and occasionally someone claimed they saw the spirit that lived in the well, often described as a woman in green, with eyes like moonlight and a laugh like rattling coins. Totally comforting. You once tried to toss in a pebble and make a wish, but Marjorie slapped it out of your hand and whispered, "No wishes today. The well's asleep. You didn't ask questions. You just picked up your pebble and apologized to the dirt." Sometimes a well would go dry for a few days, and the villagers would say, "It's angry." What would they do? Bake a pie? Not for themselves, for the well. Yes, offering food to a hole in the ground was a normal Tuesday. And if you're wondering what kind of pie a magical well prefers, the answer is usually cherry, but only if you can find a cherry tree. In February, in northern France, good luck. Your job today is to draw water carefully. You lower the bucket slowly. You don't whistle. Whistling can summon echoes, and echoes confuse the spirits. When the bucket hits the surface, you close your eyes and say a quick rhyme about not being cursed. You can't remember who taught it to you. Maybe your uncle, maybe a dream. Doesn't matter. You just don't want to wake anything up. You pull the bucket up. The water looks okay, clear. No green lady, no bitter smell. Just good old, possibly haunted hydration. You sip. It tastes like victory and a hint of moss. Later that night, you dream of a voice bubbling from the well asking for a story. You promise to tell one. Then you wake up. Your mouth is dry. But you don't dare go back to the well just yet. Maybe in the morning. Maybe when the frogs are asleep. You're brushing your hair. Or rather, you're trying. The comb gets stuck again in a knot that might be older than your last confession. You tug gently, wincing, and mutter a few apologies to your scalp. But your cousin, crouched in the doorway with a wild look in her eye, gasps and yells, "Stop." That's how they know you're marked. You pause mid-tangle. They could mean witches' demons, or her imaginary friend named Filbert. Either way, welcome to the fourth reason people in the Middle Ages were absolutely not sleeping peacefully here. Hey friends, tonight, let's explore a truly overlooked terror, one that sat quietly on your head, collecting dust, suspicion, and potentially evil energy. Because in the medieval world, a bad hair day wasn't just annoying, it was incriminating. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And don't forget to tell me what your medieval hairstyle would be called. I'm going with stressed haystack. Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, and let's settle in for the journey ahead. Back to your tangled comb. You've managed to drag it halfway through a mass of curls when Marjorie, yes, her again, walks in with a horrified face and whispers, "You're ripping it out." Don't you know loose hair invites watchers? You do not in fact know this, but you put the comb down, slowly. In many corners of medieval Europe, hair, especially loose hair, was seen as suspicious. Women were expected to keep it tied up, braided, or hidden under veils, coifs, or wimples. To let your hair down was considered indecent, unless you were possessed mourning or summoning the rain. Three very specific, very strange exceptions. There are records, actual legal cases of women accused of witchcraft simply because their hair was unbraided in public. One woman was charged after a thunderstorm arrived 2 hours after she walked through town with her locks flowing in the breeze. Coincidence? Absolutely. But coincidence had a short life expectancy in this century. Loose hair symbolized wildness, rebellion, and untamed femininity, which to the average medieval villager was a recipe for supernatural disaster. This explains why nuns cut their hair short and queens wore elaborate headdresses that made it physically impossible to turn corners without knocking over livestock. But the real fear wasn't about appearance. It was about what hair could carry. Folks believed that hair held power. It absorbed sin, stored memories, and even retained a person's essence long after being cut. That's why people burned hair instead of throwing it away. Tossing your hair into the wind was like mailing your soul to whoever caught it. And if that someone was your ex, well, now they own part of you. Fun historical sidebar: a 12th century monk wrote about a woman who kept her husband's hair in a jar to keep him loyal. Romantic, maybe. Deeply unhygienic, definitely. But she swore it worked, until he left her for a soap maker. But it wasn't just your own hair you had to worry about. If you found someone else's hair, say on your doorstep or in your bread, you had to act quickly. Because that was probably a hex bundle, a clump tied with twine, dipped in pig's blood, designed to make your sheep dance themselves to death. Allegedly. You might laugh, but in your time, people went to court over this. There's a famous 14th century case in Italy where a man was accused of planting cursed hair in his neighbor's pillow. The neighbor's chickens had started crowing at midnight, and his wife began reciting poetry backwards in her sleep. Coincidence again. Short life expectancy. Academically, there's a debate over whether hair phobia came from biblical metaphors, ancient pagan beliefs, or the very real terror of lice. Probably a combination of all three. Because nothing inspires religious panic quite like parasites. Let's talk about hair loss. Today, it's a nuisance. Back then, it was an omen. Balding meant you were cursed, touched by sin, or marked for death. There's even a story about a village where a baker lost a patch of hair overnight, and the townsfolk made him sleep in the barn until the next harvest, just in case his scalp was contagious. Spoiler, it was stress. Because making bread for 200 paranoid peasants is exhausting. You comb again. This time, gently. A strand falls to the floor. You panic. Marjorie scoops it up, wraps it in cloth, and buries it under the hearthstone. Safe, she whispers. It won't get into the wrong dreams. You try not to ask questions. That night, you dream of someone tugging your hair and whispering about spilled ink. You wake up with your braid in a knot and your blanket on the floor. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe Filbert is real after all. Of course not. Everyone feared hair. Some tried to use it for protection. Knights sometimes carried locks of hair from their lovers braided into amulets or sewn into armor, which is either deeply romantic or extremely sweaty, depending on how hot the battlefield got. And in some Slavic regions, people believed that if you made a doll out of your own hair, you could speak to yourself in dreams. Though, as scholars point out, there's a fine line between magic and mental health check-in. Anyway, you finish brushing. You place your comb under your pillow because in your village that keeps away toothaches. No one knows why. It just does. Your hair is tied. Your soul is intact. For now. But in the quiet of night, you hear it again. A strand, sliding across stone, like something searching for its owner. Maybe you. The moon is full tonight. You see it peeking through the thatch above your bed, like a silent glowing coin, round perfect and far too bright for comfort. You roll over. You try to sleep. But the moment your eyes close, you feel watched. Don't sleep near a window tonight, your uncle warned earlier. The moon sees everything during the blood round. You didn't ask what that meant. You never do. Hi all, tonight we'll discover why a glowing orb in the sky terrified people in the Middle Ages, not because it pulled the tides or made wolves howl, but because it might just turn you into something else, not a werewolf. Something worse. Someone who tells secrets in their sleep. So before you settle in, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content here. And drop a comment. How's the moon looking in your sky tonight? Full fuzzy, staring into your soul. Turn down the lights, perhaps start a fan, to create a soothing ambiance, and join me as we slowly dive into tonight's story. The full moon in your village is treated with the same cautious reverence as a tax collector with a torch. Children are brought inside early. Bread is blessed. Even the dogs are muzzled not for biting, but for listening. Because everyone knows that on the night of a full moon, truths leak. What kind of truths? The kind you never meant to say out loud. There's a tradition in some valleys that sleepwalking during a full moon means you've been called. Called by who? Well, that depends on who you ask. Some say the moon goddess. Some say forest spirits. And others, usually your more dramatic relatives, claim it's the ghosts of ancestors trying to settle family disputes. Like whether great uncle Emil actually stole that wheel of cheese in 1273. So on moonlit nights, people lock themselves in, not to keep things out, but to keep their own bodies from wandering. You sleep with a string tied from your wrist to the bedpost, just in case. Your sister once walked 3 miles in her sleep and woke up under a cart full of potatoes. She swears she was chasing music. She hasn't eaten potatoes since. The moon in medieval thought wasn't just a light, it was a force. It pulled at blood. It stirred madness. It made women's bodies behave in strange ways, at least according to the men who wrote books, without asking women anything at all. The Latin term lunaticus, yes, where we get lunatic, comes from Luna the moon. The logic? If you acted strange, it must be the moon's fault. Personal responsibility hadn't been invented yet. One French physician in the 1300s claimed that moonlight could make the brain swell with vapor. He recommended sleeping with a cabbage leaf on your head to absorb the tides. I'm not sure if it worked, but it definitely kept people from sitting too close. Others believed the full moon opened a portal between waking and dreaming, not in a poetic, soft-spoken kind of way. No, in a don't speak Latin in your sleep, or the shadows will learn your name kind of way. You heard of a boy in the next village who whispered recipes he never learned during full moons. One night, it was for a pie made of crow bones and barley. His mother tried to make it. Everyone said it tasted like truth and sadness. Whether any of this is true doesn't matter. What matters is that you believe it. And so does everyone around you. So you hang herbs above the bed. You place a mirror facing the door. You sprinkle salt in the shape of a snail on the floor, because that's how you confuse spirits. They follow the spiral forever and forget why they came. And then there's the moon oil. You don't know what's in it. No one does. Marjorie sells it in tiny clay pots and insists it muffles thoughts. You dab a bit on your temples. It smells like garlic and something you don't have a name for. Your dreams become slower, heavier, more geometric. You wake up to find the mirror cracked. Marjorie says that means your reflection stepped out to talk. Nothing serious, just social moon behavior. Academics today puzzle over how seriously people feared the full moon in the Middle Ages. Was it spiritual, psychological, a coping mechanism for unpredictable behavior before psychology had a budget? One theory suggests that sleep disorders like REM parasomnia were interpreted as visitations or possessions, especially when they coincided with a full moon, which, to be fair, would freak anyone out in a candlelit mud house. But then there's the dancing. Oh yes, the dancing. On certain moonlit nights, entire villages reported waking to find children missing from their beds, only to discover them, hours later, barefoot dancing in the fields, laughing, crying, glowing, some said. No one was punished, but no one asked questions either. You lie still. The moonlight pours through a crack in the roof and lands on your arm. You pull the blanket higher. You try not to think about how many times you've woken up with soil on your feet, or why your pillow smells like pine when you live nowhere near a forest. You close your eyes. You whisper a rhyme to yourself. Moon is round. Moon is wide. Keep my body safe inside. The wind shifts. A soft breath. A creak. You dream of dancing. You always do. And somewhere outside in the silent moonlight, a tree sways without wind. Your legs won't stop moving. You're lying in bed, exhausted from a long day of turning hay into slightly more organized hay. But your feet keep twitching like they're itching to dance, and not the joyful kind of dancing either. This feels possessed, rhythmic, reluctant, like your body is following music that isn't playing. You're not alone. Outside your window, someone is humming. Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into one of the strangest collective fears in medieval history, the terror of dancing. Not just any dancing. We're talking about involuntary, unstoppable, apocalyptic group dancing, the kind that makes you sweat, cry collapse, and sometimes keep going until you die. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And leave a comment. What's the last song that made you move? Hopefully, it didn't end with a priest and a salt circle. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's story together. You live in a small village with fewer goats than gossip, and one morning you wake up to find everyone outside dancing. No instruments, no feast. Just dozens of people swaying, hopping, stomping, their eyes glassy, their faces streaked with tears. They don't speak. They don't stop. Even your Uncle Gervais, who hasn't moved quickly since the turnip incident of 1327, is flailing his arms like the wind owes him money. You ask what's happening. Someone whispers, "The bread. It was cursed." And here it begins the great mystery of dancing plagues, most famously recorded in Strasbourg in 1518. Though similar outbreaks occurred earlier, these episodes involved groups of people who spontaneously danced for days, sometimes weeks. Some historians think it was a form of mass hysteria. Others blame food poisoning, specifically ergot, a fungus that grows on damp rye and causes hallucinations. Basically medieval LSD. Add some fasting trauma and fear of sin, and voila, you've got yourself a full-blown jig of doom. Let's say your village had a particularly soggy harvest. Moldy grain. No problem. Just bake it into bread and serve it with fear. Within hours, people are twitching, convulsing, and murmuring names of saints they'd never heard of. The strange part, no one really tried to stop them. In fact, in many places, authorities encouraged the dancing. They thought it was a curse that needed to burn itself out. So they cleared out courtyards, hired musicians, and basically said, "All right, dance it off." Like treating food poisoning with karaoke. Spoiler, it didn't help. You remember when it hit your village. Your cousin Bernard twirled non-stop for 6 hours, muttering about firebirds and cabbage. He had to be tied to the fence with a rope soaked in lavender oil. When he came to, he claimed he'd spoken with Saint Vitus, who told him to wear fewer socks. Speaking of Saint Vitus, he became the unofficial patron of these episodes. Saint Vitus dance was the name given to the condition believed to be divine punishment or purification. So if you suddenly found yourself doing the grapevine in the middle of Mass, it wasn't your fault. It was holy. There were treatments, of course, mostly involving herbs chants and staring at mirrors until the reflection blinked first. One recipe called for soaking your shoes in goat's milk overnight while reciting the names of your ancestors in reverse order. No pressure if you forgot someone. Just hope they weren't petty in the afterlife. Modern scholars argue whether these episodes were psychosomatic, neurological, or just highly contagious expressions of trauma. After all, the Middle Ages were not exactly stress-free. War, famine, plague, sometimes the body found its own escape, even if it meant dancing until you collapsed into mud. But for the people living through it, there was no scientific explanation, only fear. Fear that if you caught the rhythm, you might not stop. You fall asleep tonight with one foot dangling off the straw mat. It taps just once, then again. You whisper, "No music tonight, please." But in your dream, you're already dancing. You're on a hill. The moon is low. Around you, villagers spin in wide circles, faces blurred. You feel your knees buckle not from pain, but from pressure, as if the ground wants you to move. You wake up sweaty, breathing hard, foot twitching. The next morning, the baker refuses to sell bread unless you bring your own flour. "Can't trust the grain," he mutters. "Not after what happened last Lammas." And sure enough, someone's humming again. You clutch a pouch of sage around your neck. Marjorie says it dampens rhythm. You don't know what that means, but it sounds useful. You avoid the village square. You don't look at the cobblestones. They say, if you stare long enough, they'll pulse. The worst part, no one talks about it after. It's like it never happened. The dancing ends. People go back to tilling the fields and complaining about soup. But every now and then, someone taps their foot just a little too long at church, and everyone else stares, just in case. You're sitting by the fire stirring a pot of cabbage soup that smells slightly too honest. It's been a quiet evening, which is suspicious. No distant screaming, no chickens philosophizing, not even Marjorie accusing the wind of stealing her comb. Just quiet. And then you hear it, a sigh. But not from you, and not from anyone in the room. It comes from inside the wall. Hello again. Tonight we're pressing our ears to the cold, damp stone of medieval paranoia to explore a fear that echoes literally, the terror of the sighing wall, and the idea that spirits, or worse, lived between the cracks of your very own home. So, before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And comment this time, have you ever heard your house breathe? Go ahead, lower the light switch on a gentle fan for some calming white noise, and let's begin our evening adventure. In the Middle Ages, walls weren't just for keeping things out. Sometimes they were believed to be keeping things in. You live in a stone house mortared with lime and mystery. Every winter, the walls weep a little. Moisture seeps through, leaving trails like tears. This is normal, you're told. It's just the stones adjusting. But then the whispers start. Your cousin insists it's just wind. You want to believe that. But wind doesn't call you by name. There was a belief, especially in isolated rural villages, that walls could absorb energy, like emotion, sin, or sound. A well-placed confession, a scream, even a laugh too loud. It didn't vanish. It stayed, lurking in the limestone like a coiled-up memory. And sometimes, if the house grew too old or too sad, those memories leaked. A sighing house, people said, was one that had heard too much. People tried everything. Some hammered iron nails into the corners of rooms to pin down the voices. Others burned rosemary in wall crevices or stuffed them with ashes from clean deaths. Don't ask what a clean death is. You'll only get a shrug and an extra scoop of ash. You remember when your aunt moved in after her husband died. She claimed the walls whispered things he never said. In life, mean things. Things about turnips. You didn't believe her until the pantry started opening by itself. And there's the wall pact ritual. In some regions, before moving into a house, a family would press their palms to the main support beam and whisper secrets they'd never tell. The idea was to bond with the house so it wouldn't turn on them later. If your secrets matched the house's energy, it welcomed you. If not, you got sighs. Or in extreme cases, echo laughter. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. One man reportedly laughed at his own joke while sitting by the fire, only to hear the same laugh repeat slightly, delayed, but from under the floorboards. He moved out that night. His joke wasn't even that good. Now, from a modern perspective, this could be anything. Acoustics, rodents, thermal expansion. But in your world, explanations are less important than stories. And your story is the house is listening. Tonight, you sit by the hearth, reading a psalm aloud to calm your nerves. You pause. Something repeats the last line, not loudly, not clearly, just enough. You quickly tuck the book under a chair and clear your throat like you meant to stop reading. Your dog tilts its head, then growls at the wall. Great. There's even a custom in your village called wall weaning. If a child sleeps too close to a whispering wall, they're said to grow inward, meaning they become quiet, secretive, and sometimes prophetic. You slept next to the eastern wall for 6 years. You've never been particularly chatty since. Some houses were declared too full and had to be cleared, not by priests, by women. Specifically, old women with salt rings and an impressive knowledge of tone. They'd knock on walls, listen carefully, and declare which memories needed to be drowned with broth. You once watched one pour soup directly into a crack in the kitchen. It steamed, then sighed. Academics today propose that this fear may have stemmed from drafty architecture, combined with the very human desire to believe your home remembers you. Whether out of guilt or longing, people project a kind of spirit into their space. In the Middle Ages, they just took that spirit very literally. The sighing continues tonight. You try to ignore it. You hum. You talk to the soup. But it comes again. Longer this time. Like someone on the other side of the wall has just heard bad news. You do the only thing you know. You tell the wall a secret, just a little one. Nothing dangerous. Something about how you never liked your cousin's soup. You wait. Nothing. You exhale. The wall exhales with you. Sleep comes slowly, but it does come. And in your dreams, you walk down a hallway of stone. Each brick pulses softly. Some are warm, some are weeping. One of them says your name in a voice like your own. You don't answer. You don't have to. The wall already knows. You're walking home at dusk, cradling a bundle of turnips like their royal treasure. The sky is pink, the road is muddy, and your thoughts are somewhere between soup and socks. Then you see it, your shadow. Except, it's not moving like you are. Hey friends, tonight, let's explore one of the quietest, most personal fears of the Middle Ages. The fear that your shadow wasn't really yours, that it could change, escape, or worse, tell on you. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And tell me, when was the last time you looked at your shadow and thought, wait a minute, turn down the lights, perhaps start a fan to create a soothing ambiance, and join me as we slowly dive into tonight's story. You've always been told that your shadow follows you. It should. That's the deal. You walk, it walks. You dance, it flails. You sleep, it disappears politely. But today, as the last rays of sun stretch across the village road, your shadow lingers just a breath too long behind you. and your stomach curls. Because in your time, a shadow isn't just a shape, it's evidence. In certain corners of medieval belief, the shadow was considered a piece of the soul, a darker twin. Some even thought that if your shadow was missing, or wrong, or acting strange, it meant your soul had wandered off, been tampered with, or taken by something. You've heard the stories. A baker in another town whose shadow didn't reflect his limp and then mysteriously started limping before he did. A boy who was found sobbing in the fields, convinced his shadow was whispering backwards. And that one noblewoman whose shadow reportedly bowed when no one else did. No one saw her again. But her shadow. According to rumor, it still shows up during eclipses. There were even rules, shadow etiquette, you could say. Never step on someone else's shadow deliberately. That was an insult to their spirit. Never let your shadow touch a corpse. That was how you caught memory rot. And never under any circumstances cast your shadow into a church bell tower after sunset. Why, no one knows. But a man once did, and now people call him that candlelight fellow who smells like rain. You don't ask questions. Tonight you walk home a little faster. Your shadow follows. Sort of. It drags slightly behind, like it's being lazy or resistant. You turn quickly. It doesn't. You freeze. So does it. But it's smiling. No, that's just your imagination. Shadows don't have expressions, except when they do. People in your village deal with shadow anxiety in different ways. Some wear soul pins, tiny pieces of iron on their belts that supposedly keep the shadow tethered. Others paint symbols on their doors to confuse the shadow so it has to knock before entering. You personally prefer to light 2 candles instead of 1. If the shadows match, you're fine. If not, well, you try not to think about that. There's even a job, rare, highly secretive, called a shadow binder. No one knows exactly what they do, but when they arrive, people go quiet. They carry a satchel of charcoal salt and a mirror that's always covered. They stay 3 nights, then leave. Usually alone, always humming. Academics today wonder if this fear of shadows is just poetic projection, a way of understanding identity in a time before mirrors were common. But in your world, mirrors aren't comfort, they're risk. Because sometimes they show more than they should. And shadows, they never lie. Which brings us to the oddest bit of all. Some people in the Middle Ages believed that shadows could move on without you. If you wronged someone, stole, betrayed, insulted a cow, the shadow might leave first ashamed. You wouldn't know until your reflection started flickering, or until people stopped recognizing you in their dreams. And yes, people used to dream of others by their shadows. You'd say, "I saw your shape in the fog." It must be an omen. If the dream shadow smiled, good harvest. If it wept, stay inside. If it danced, well, we've already talked about that in part 6, haven't we? Tonight you light your 2 candles. The shadows are close, almost identical, except your left arm is raised, and the shadow's isn't. You lower your arm. Slowly. It doesn't move. You blow out the candles. Total darkness. Safer that way. You try to sleep, but your dreams are busy tonight. You're walking through a hallway lined with curtains. At the end is a figure that looks like you. Same clothes, same gait, same slightly judgmental eyebrows. You reach out. It turns, and it's empty. A hollow figure of dark silk and flickering dust. You wake up. Your candle's been relit. By whom? Let's not ask that tonight. Let's just Lie still and hope your shadow's in a forgiving mood. There's a smell in the house. You noticed it this morning. Faint, sharp, slightly metallic. Not quite rot. Not quite smoke. It lingers at the edge of your senses like a secret trying to be remembered. You scrub the floors, hang rosemary in the windows, even sprinkle salt under the table. But it's still there. It clings to your clothes. It follows you to bed. And tonight, it's stronger. Hey, friends, tonight, let's explore a fear that clung to people more tightly than the scent itself. The medieval terror of strange smells in the night, especially the one no one wanted to name, the smell of sulfur. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And tell me what's the weirdest smell you've ever woken up to. Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, and let's settle in for the journey ahead. In your world, smell is serious business. It's not just about comfort or hygiene. A strange smell, especially at night, is a message, an omen, a possible warning from the other side. And the worst of all, smells the one whispered about in taverns and scribbled in margins of dusty books, is the scent of sulfur, also known as the smell of hell. To your medieval neighbors, sulfur didn't just stink, it meant something. People believed it accompanied demons, curses, or the presence of infernal negotiation. If your home started to smell of sulfur without cause, it meant you'd been visited, or marked, or that someone nearby was doing things with candles and Latin phrases they shouldn't be doing after sundown. You once heard a story about a monk who smelled sulfur coming from under his bed. He screamed, threw holy water, and found a turnip that had gone bad. But no one blamed him, because you never gamble with smell, and you never ever say it's probably nothing. Tonight, your house smells like that? Probably nothing. You light a candle made of tallow and sage. You pray, not because you expect an answer, but because you need your voice to fill the room before something else's does. Your cousin Marjorie once claimed she could track sin by scent. She'd sniff the air and declare things like, "Someone nearby has impure dreams." She wasn't invited to weddings often. But when she said she smelled sulfur near the bakery last year, and then the chimney exploded, people started listening. In some places, people believed a sulfur smell meant your dreams had been touched, interfered with, like someone had edited them in the middle of the night. And not for fun, for extraction. The soul, they said, has a scent, and when it burns, it smells like brimstone, which is a very poetic way to explain indigestion, but still. To protect yourself, people burned juniper or garlic under their bed sheets and slept with silver coins under their tongues. You've tried all three. The garlic mostly just makes your pillow smell aggressive. Then there's the legend of the fireless flame and invisible burn that leaves no mark but always smells of sulfur. If you wake up and smell it, but can't find the source, you've already been passed through. That's the phrase. Passed through. As in something walked through your room briefly with intention. No greetings, no notes, just scent. You light more herbs. You open the window. The scent fades for a moment and then strengthens. It's not outside. It's here. You go room by room. The smell follows. It's not constant. It surges, retreats like breath, like something deciding. In a dark corner of your kitchen, you find a scorch mark. No flame, no heat. Just a small black circle on the wooden floor, the size of a coin. You don't touch it. You sprinkle salt in a spiral around it and whisper a joke. That's a tradition to sour the moment with humor, so the thing leaves bored. So you say, "What did the demon say when he lost his pitchfork? I guess I'll just wing it." The room stays quiet. You sleep with your head under a blanket soaked in rose water. You dream of smoke rising from your hands. You dream of someone knocking from inside your chest. You wake to silence. The smell is gone, but the spiral is broken, and the black circle is now slightly bigger. Scholars today debate whether this fear of sulfur came from geological events, religious metaphors, or just the terrifying combination of poor ventilation and imagination. But in your time, no one's debating. They're just quietly burning sage and not asking questions. You know you should tell someone. Maybe Marjorie, maybe the priest, maybe the dog. But instead, you leave a note near the mark. A simple one. "I smelled you. I laughed. I'm not afraid." Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. The fire crackles softly in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow across the room. You sit close to it, not because you're cold, but because the light feels safe, alive. You've always trusted the fire. It cooks your food, warms your bed, keeps the night beasts guessing. Until tonight. Because tonight, the fire talks back. Hi again. Tonight we're going to gently stir the embers of one of the most peculiar fears from the medieval imagination. When fire wasn't your friend. When it hissed, whispered, or flared at the wrong moment. When people wondered whether it was burning more than just wood, and whether it was watching. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And share in the comments, has your fireplace ever made a sound that felt personal? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's story together. In your time, fire isn't just a tool. It's a presence. Villagers talk about fire like it's a relative, one you love, one you fear, one who sometimes gets angry when you don't feed them the right wood. There's an old superstition in your village. Fire remembers insults. If you mutter curses near the hearth, it will wait. And the next time you strike a flint, it won't catch. Or it'll flare suddenly, singing your eyebrows and your reputation. Everyone knows someone who had a spiteful fire. Yours has been acting strange lately. It flares when you speak too loudly. It dies when you mention your father's name. And just last week, it hissed when you stirred soup, not boiled. Hissed. Like breath escaping a sealed mouth. Marjorie, of course, has opinions. She says you need to give the fire an offering. Bread crust, old song lyrics, a confession whispered directly into the coals. You try the first two. No change. The third, you lean in close, tell the fire about the time you lied to get the last apple tart, and the flame shivers. Like it's laughing. There's a belief passed down by chimney sweeps and midwives alike that certain sounds in a fire mean something. A pop, a warning, a snap, a visitor, a soft crack like a breaking twig. That's someone saying your name. One man claimed the fire called him to walk into it. He survived barely, but swore he saw something inside, not flames, but eyes, golden and blinking, waiting behind the smoke. He became a beekeeper after that. No one asked questions. In some regions, it was common to tell stories to the fire before bed, not for entertainment, but as a safeguard. Because if you kept the fire listening, it wouldn't go wandering. Yes, you heard that right. In the folklore of certain regions, fire could wander. It would leave the hearth at night in the form of light or mist and drift through the house looking for secrets or feet to burn. So each night before sleep, you recite a tale, something small, harmless. Tonight it's about a fox who married a chicken. The fire flickers politely. It doesn't spit. That's a good sign. But you've also heard the other stories, the ones where fire behaves like a mirror. You sit in front of it, and sometimes, just for a flicker, you see something that isn't you. A hand raised, a mouth open, a face that blinks at the wrong time. You've seen it once, or thought you did. It had your nose. Your candle tonight burns unusually fast. The wax hisses. That's not normal. You pinch the wick, and the fire jumps too high too fast like it's protesting. You whisper, "I'm sorry," and it calms. The rest of the night, you stay still. There's a soft crackle. Then, a word, no, just wind. Or is it, some villagers believe that if a fire calls to you softly repeatedly, you must answer within 3 nights, or your fire will go out forever. Not just one hearth. Every hearth you touch. Your fingers won't warm. Your soup won't boil. You'll become a person without flame. And that's worse than cold. That's untethered. So tonight you answer. You lean in close. You whisper back, "I'm listening." The flame turns blue for a heartbeat, then orange again. Nothing else happens, but you feel warmer. Scholars today explain many of these phenomena with physics. Sap pockets in firewood cause popping sounds. Drafty chimneys shift flame patterns. Pareidolia makes you see faces where there are none. But try telling that to someone whose entire kitchen went dark after mocking their own fireplace. You crawl into bed. You whisper goodnight to the hearth. The flame answers with one last soft pop. You smile. Then you pause. Because that pop sounded like a syllable. And the syllable was your name. You wake up to the sound of breaking glass. Your heart thumps, once, twice, then settles into dread. It's not a robber, not a storm. It's something worse. You know it even before you roll out of bed. The mirror has shattered. Hey guys, tonight we're going to brush the dust off another medieval fear. One that's crept into fairy tales, lingered in horror stories, and still makes people shiver a little in antique shops. A broken mirror, but not because of vanity. Because of memory. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know, do you still get a little nervous when a mirror cracks? Now dim? The lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's story together. The mirror lies on the floor, split like ice on a frozen lake. You don't need to count the years of bad luck. That's not what you fear. What you fear is that something got out. In the Middle Ages, mirrors weren't cheap. Most homes didn't even have one. Polished metal, dark glass, or still water served as the reflection of choice. But that didn't stop people from fearing what could live inside. You grew up hearing the rules. Cover all mirrors during thunderstorms. Never look into one by candlelight. And if someone is dying in the house, cover every mirror with cloth, or their soul might get trapped. It's not metaphorical. They meant it literally. There's a belief that a mirror records the essence of what it reflects. If someone dies in front of it, their final breath becomes a shadow print lingering like smoke behind glass. And if the mirror breaks, the soul escapes, confused, restless, reflective. You remember the village midwife once yelling at a boy for peeking into a water basin after dark? "Your face doesn't belong to you right now," she snapped. Wait until sunrise, the boy cried, but he waited. Because sometimes a reflection lies. Your grandmother had a mirror that was always slightly off. When you stood before it, your eyes never quite met your own. Once you swear, you saw yourself blink before you did. She said the mirror was full. She covered it every night with lavender cloth and murmured apologies to it before bed. When she died, no one could find the mirror. The wall where it once hung is now oddly cold, even in summer. No one paints over it. Now your own mirror has cracked, and you didn't do it. That's the scariest part. Some people believed a broken mirror unlocks memory. Not your own necessarily, just a memory, a leftover moment, a confession, an argument, a lie no one heard until now. So when a mirror shatters, people don't sweep immediately. They listen to the shards. Some say they hiss. Some say they hum. Some say they repeat words that were whispered in front of them decades ago. You kneel beside the glass. It's silent, but the reflections are wrong. One shard shows your face, but you're smiling. You're not smiling. Another shard shows no reflection at all. You sweep it up with a rag and toss it into the fire. The flames flicker green. Not great. You sleep uneasily. The blankets are warm, but your mind keeps spinning. What did the mirror remember? Who did it reflect that doesn't want to leave? At some point in the night, you hear your name, whispered, soft, as if from under your bed. You don't answer. There's an obscure belief that mirrors can replay faces, like dreams on loop. If someone stood in front of it often enough, especially with emotion or regret, their image gets burned in. They become a kind of emotional echo. You once visited a house with a mirror that showed a man no one recognized, pale tired, always mouthing something. The mirror was eventually buried. Not the man. The mirror, buried under stone, with a prayer. Scholars today often dismiss these beliefs as symbolic fears, projections of the human psyche discomfort with the self or a fear of death's lingering presence. But in your world, the symbolism walks. And sometimes it talks back. By morning, the smell of burnt glass lingers in your room. A single shard survived. You wrap it in cloth, whisper "not today," and tuck it deep inside the cupboard. Maybe it will stay quiet. Maybe it won't. Just before you leave the room, you glance at the window pane. For a moment, your reflection is standing still, even though you're walking, and it's smiling again. The shutters are nailed shut, not latched, not tied. Nailed. Thick, uneven boards hammered across every window. It's not storm season. It's not war. It's something else. It's the howling time. Hello again. Tonight we're closing ourselves in and exploring a sound that haunted medieval nights more than thunder or swords. A long, low howl from far beyond the fields. That wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite wind, and definitely wasn't welcome. So, before you settle in, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what we share here. And in the comments, tell me what's the eeriest sound you've ever heard from outside your window. Dim those lights, turn on a fan for some calming white noise. Just make sure it doesn't howl. And let's drift gently into tonight's story. You live on the edge of the village where the fields go on forever and the trees stand too still. At night, the silence here is deep, thick, until it's not, because once or twice a year, in the days between late autumn and winter's first snow, the howl returns. No one knows where it comes from. It's not a wolf. Your village doesn't have wolves anymore. And it's not wind, too steady, too focused, too aware. You first heard it as a child. A long, mournful sound rising up from the direction of the fields, as if something huge and ancient was calling across the world, and only the unlucky few could hear it. The adults pretended it was nothing, but they hammered the shutters anyway. They always do. They call it the wind that forgets your name. Because after you hear it, you don't feel quite right for a while. You forget small things. Which pocket your flint is in, where you left your socks, the name of your mother's cat, the one you raised. You had a cat, right? Anyway, the sound has rules. It only comes after sundown. It never howls twice in one night. And if it comes near your house, you must not respond. No candles in the windows. No curious peeking. No knocking back. Because some say it knocks back. Marjorie swears the howl is just wind trapped in the hills. But her shutters are the thickest in town. Her entire house is wrapped in wool and garlic. Others say it's the field walker, a spirit who once owned all the land and now returns once a year to see what the living have done with it. And if he doesn't like what he sees, he takes a memory. Just one. Nothing dramatic, but always something that mattered. Last year, the butcher's son forgot how to sharpen a knife. The year before, a man forgot his own wedding. You remember that year clearly, except you don't remember who got married. There are rituals, of course. You hang bells made of clay in your chimney meant to rattle if the howl passes by. You scatter old shoes at the corners of your home, 4 of them mismatched and preferably ugly. Supposedly, spirits get confused by poor taste and lose interest. And always, you cover your mirrors. Because if the howl gets in and it sees itself, well, that's how it learns to come back. Tonight, the boards are in place. The clay bells hang. The garlic smells hopeful. But your heart still beats faster as the sun disappears. You sit near the fire, staring at the wall, doing your best impression of a confident person. Then it begins. Faint. So faint you think it's your stomach, then louder, clearer, long and low like wind, trying to hum a song it half remembers. You don't move. The dog growls softly, then curls up tighter, eyes wide. The candles flicker, not from breeze, from something else, and for a moment, you feel like the air is listening. You think of the rules. Stay still. Stay silent. But your foot taps. Once. The sound fades. Then, knock. Not loud, just a soft knock. 1, 2. At the window. You don't breathe. There's no glass to break, just thick boards. Still, you feel something waiting. Eventually, the fire pops. The dog whines. You exhale. The moment passes. In the morning, the field is normal. Quiet. But your boots are missing. You check every room. Nothing. That afternoon, you find them outside the window, perfectly placed, laces tied, facing the fields. Scholars today wonder if the medieval howl stories were early explanations for infrasound low-frequency noises that can cause unease, confusion, even hallucinations. Others suggest psychological projections, shared cultural stress, looking for a voice. But in your time, explanations don't comfort. Habits do. So you keep your shutters nailed. You avoid saying your full name after sunset. And when the wind rises again, you don't listen too closely. just in case it listens back. You spot it near the vegetable cart, coiled beneath the turnip crate, silent and still. A thin, elegant snake, its eyes like beads of obsidian, its body barely thicker than your thumb. You freeze. It doesn't move. And then you notice it's looking at you. Not with hunger, not with fear, with recognition. Hey friends, tonight we're slipping into one of the more subtle, strangely intimate fears of the Middle Ages. The fear not of snakes that bite, but of snakes that know, and possibly know too much. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And tell me, if a snake made direct eye contact with you for 5 seconds straight, what would you do? I vote, apologize, and leave the continent. Turn down the lights. Perhaps start a fan for ambiance, and let's quietly shed our assumptions as we glide into tonight's story. In your time, snakes are not just pests. They are messengers, or spies, or depending on who you ask living questions. The kind that coil around your ankles and ask, "What did you do last night?" You were raised with the usual warnings. Don't step on snakes. Don't talk near snakes. Don't dream of snakes without spitting twice and kicking the fireplace. But lately, it's not fear of being bitten that keeps you awake. It's the way they watch. You're not alone in this. People in your village speak softly about the snakes not allowed, but in half sentences and gestures. No one mentions them directly. Not out of superstition, out of respect. Because the snakes here aren't just animals, they're listeners. And sometimes they show up at inconvenient times. One woman swore a snake slithered into her home every night during her husband's illness. Never bit, never hissed. Just curled by the hearth and watched. He died peacefully. The snake never came back. Some say it was his spirit. Others say it was keeping a deal. There are stories, of course, about snakes whispering names in the fields. About one that followed a man for 7 years and always showed up when he lied. When he finally confessed to what no one knows, the snake curled up in his boot and vanished. He never lied again, or wore that boot. You begin to notice them more often now. In corners, on stone fences, in windowsills at dusk, always looking, always quiet, and they don't flee from you. You've started offering them crumbs, not because you think they eat bread, but because you feel watched when you don't. Marjorie catches you once and hisses, "You're feeding memories, not mouths." She's probably right. In some traditions, snakes were seen as memory vessels, creatures that stored forgotten truths. Some households believed that if you stared into a snake's eyes long enough, it would show you a memory you'd tried to bury. Usually yours. Sometimes not. There's even an old charm scratched into the back of a door frame. May the serpent speak only when you are ready. You never noticed it before. Now you trace it with your finger each night. That should help. Probably. Academically, some argue this fear comes from symbolic associations, snakes as temptation knowledge or death. Others think it's the silence, the unblinking eyes, the way they move like sentences without verbs. Tonight, one waits for you on the windowsill, its body curled neatly, its head resting on the wood. It doesn't blink. You don't either. You whisper, "What do you want?" It doesn't move. But the next morning, you remember something. Not a dream, a truth, a promise you made years ago. To someone no longer here. You never kept it. You feel a coil tighten in your chest. The snake is gone. Later that week, your shadow hesitates before following you into the church. No one else notices. You try not to look at the stone near the altar where a serpent is carved into the wall. You've never noticed it before. Or maybe it wasn't there before. You sleep with the door slightly open that night, just in case something wants to come in and remind you of what you've forgotten. You're walking the orchard path when something catches your eye. A tree just off the trail, old, bent, knotted like an arthritic finger. Its leaves rustle gently, but there's no wind. None. You stop. You stare. The tree rustles again. Only this one. Hey friends, tonight we're going to lean into one of the eerier folk fears of the medieval mind. The unsettling belief that some trees know too much, and worse, that they're listening when no one else is. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And comment this: if a tree waved at you when the wind was dead, still would you wave back? Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, maybe not one that sounds like leaves, and let's ease into tonight's story. In your world, forests are not whimsical. They are repositories of secrets, of sins, of sounds you never admit to hearing. There's a saying in your village: if you want to lie, go lie near a tree, but never too close. Because trees, they say, remember. They don't forgive. And occasionally, they whisper the truth to someone who didn't ask. You've passed this orchard 100 times. It's mostly apples, a few pears, one single ancient plum that hasn't borne fruit since the plague. But today, that tree rustled when it shouldn't have. Just one. The rest stood still. You walk by quickly, but your shadow pauses. You try not to notice. In the Middle Ages, people held complex, reverent, often fearful views about trees. Some were sacred, some were cursed, all were aware. There were trees you never cut, not even for firewood, because they were known as rooted listeners. Supposedly, they grew near places of sorrow, or birth, or betrayal. If a secret was spoken under such a tree, it would never be forgotten. Some trees were marked with ribbons, red for silence, white for grief, black for promises unkept. Travelers avoided those. Farmers never harvested from them. One woman in a neighboring village once hung her laundry near a witness tree. Her socks never dried. Her husband stopped dreaming. Coincidence? No one thought so. And then there's the phenomenon they call windless leaves, when a tree moves, but the wind is still. It's always just one, always just for a moment. They say that's how trees respond when they hear something they weren't supposed to. A lie, a secret, a name spoken in vain. You once said something unkind near a willow. You didn't think anyone heard. But the next morning, a branch had fallen across your doorstep. Not heavy, just there, waiting. You said sorry. The tree hasn't moved since. Tonight the orchard feels different. You walk by again, this time with intent. You stop near the old plum tree. It rustles once. You whisper, "I didn't mean it." Nothing. You place a pebble at its base. That's what people do here when they need to apologize to something bigger than themselves. It's still until you turn to leave. Then crack. A branch drops. Clean. Dry. Hollow. You pick it up. It's light in your hand. Warm. You don't take it home. You know better. Academics suggest that this fear stems from the natural human tendency to anthropomorphize nature, especially trees. Their size-age stillness, it all gives the illusion of ancient presence. Add a few generations of war famine and family secrets, and suddenly every oak has an opinion. But in your world, the illusion is real enough. There are places you don't speak. Certain groves, evenings where the sky is too orange and the bark seems too dark. You pass in silence. You offer a coin, or a crumb, or a truth. One tree near the churchyard is said to hum when someone lies nearby. You tried it once. It didn't hum. You still feel guilty. Tonight the wind rises, but not in the orchard. The trees there stay motionless, except for one. That same bent plum. It shakes. Once, as if agreeing. You go home. You draw the curtain. You do not look back. But later, as you drift to sleep, you hear leaves brushing softly against your shutter. And you wonder, was it wind or something reminding you that it remembers? The map lies open on the table. Hand-drawn, creased at the corners, edges smudged by dozens of hands. It shows your village, the road to the next town, the river bend, the forest just the edge, and beyond that, a vast stretch of blank parchment. Not even labeled, just faint brushstrokes where someone meant to write something, but didn't. High all tonight, we'll discover what may have been the most lingering and existential fear of the medieval mind. Not demons, not plagues, not witches, but the blank space on the map, the not knowing. So before you settle in, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And share in the comments, what's the farthest you've ever gone from home? And did it feel like falling off the edge of a story? Dim those lights, start a gentle fan for ambiance, and let's drift into tonight's final chapter together. You trace your finger along the inked roads, the little drawings of buildings, Wells Towers. Each one labeled in a tidy script. Then, nothing. No towns, no landmarks. Just a pale beige wash like fog on paper. It's not that no one has been there. It's that those who went never came back with a story. And that's worse. In your village, maps are rare, precious, incomplete. They don't show the world. They show what people are willing to admit exists. The rest, that's what dreams are for. Or nightmares. They call it the white wild, a term for anywhere uncharted, unexplored, unclaimed by story. Because medieval fear isn't just about monsters, it's about silence, about being alone with a question that no one can answer, and suspecting that the answer might be you shouldn't have asked. Your grandfather once claimed he'd been beyond the forest, found a hill shaped like a sleeping woman, sat on her knee, and watched the stars blink in the wrong pattern. When he came back, he didn't speak for a week. Then suddenly he started calling rain the old language. You still don't know what he meant, and no one ever found that hill again. In some medieval maps, the unknown is filled with drawings, dragons, sea serpents, cyclopes, roasting boars. But those weren't just for decoration. They were warnings. And in other maps, there's nothing at all, just emptiness. That's the more terrifying version. At least a monster implies someone saw something. But blank space, that's absence with teeth. There's an idea in your village. The map ends when memory ends. Meaning, if no one remembers it, it might not be there anymore. Not dead, just folded up, waiting. You've always wondered what happens if you step off the edge. Not literally, there's no cliff, just a feeling that you might lose your name, your shape, your reason for turning around. Marjorie claims the last person who walked into the white wild came back with perfect skin, no memories, and a laugh that never stopped. She also says her bread recipe was stolen by the wind, so take that as you will. Academics say these blank spaces reflected political boundaries, lack of data, or artistic choices, that the fear was metaphorical. But in your world, metaphor wakes you up at 2 a.m., whispering, keep walking. Tonight you sit with the map a little longer. You light a candle. The edge of the map flickers. For a moment, you think you see a shape move in the blank space. You blink. It's gone. You fold the map, tuck it away, but even folded, the emptiness presses against your thoughts. You dream of a road with no name, of footsteps beside yours but no shadows, of reaching a place where even the stars are drawn by hand and they're smudging. When you wake, your window is open. A breeze stirs the curtains, and on your table, the map is unrolled again. Only this time, the blank part is smaller. Someone's drawn a single tree, a crooked path, and a name you don't recognize, but it's written in your handwriting. You never picked up a quill. Not last night. Not ever. But somehow, the map remembers. And now so do you. So now, here we are. The shutters are closed. The fire has quieted. The map is folded away. And every strange whisper of the Middle Ages has tucked itself back into its shadowy corner. You've wandered through fears of mice, with messages sighing walls, moonlit footsteps, sulfur-scented secrets, and trees that never forget. You've listened to the quiet terror of things not said, things half seen. And you made it all the way to the edge of the map. You're still here, safe. Still wondering maybe, but a little braver in the wondering. Because the truth is, these fears, these dragons that weren't dragons, were never really about monsters. They were about living in a world too big, too strange, too unknowable, and learning to exist inside it anyway. To name a thing is to shrink it, but to listen to it, to whisper back, that's how you learn to sleep while the wind still howls. So tonight, let the echoes settle. Let the map curl at the edges. Let the walls hum their harmless songs, and let the old orchard sleep without needing forgiveness. You don't need to know everything to rest. You don't need to understand the shadows to close your eyes. And if something knocks, don't worry. It's probably just the cat. That's the story. For tonight, may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace. Hey friends, tonight let's explore what happens when a pig decides your carefully planned morning simply isn't happening. You've just finished repairing the fence. Again, you used the last of the decent rope-borrowed nails from the carpenter who reminded you he's still waiting on payment in the form of that single goose, and even whispered a little prayer to St. Gertrude, patron saint of rodents, because honestly, you'll take any protection you can get. The air smells of damp hay garlic and faint desperation. And then, thunk, squeal, crash. Henrietta is out. Again, before you can even sigh, she's already halfway down the lane, trotting with the confidence of a pig who knows exactly where she's not supposed to be. So, before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share, and leave a comment with your local time and whether you've ever chased livestock in socks or in shame. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grab the first thing within reach, a wooden spoon, which is neither intimidating nor aerodynamic, but it makes you feel less helpless. The chase begins. Henrietta ducks into the side path near the village green, scattering a group of geese like a feathered explosion. She swerves past the tannery, where the tanner, unbothered, just raises his tankard in salute and barrels into the herb garden behind the apothecary's shed. You're panting. She's glowing with glee. This is not her first breakout, nor her fifth. Last time she ended up inside the priest's wine cellar, tipped over 2 barrels, and then slept for 3 days with a sprig of rosemary in her mouth. You tried to claim it was a divine vision. The priest claimed it was Tuesday. You reached the garden fence just in time to see Henrietta root digging through something green and suspiciously expensive looking. You shout her name. She grunts once. Not an apology. In defiance, a handful of villagers gather holding mugs and expressions of mild entertainment. No one offers to help. You get the distinct impression that this is their show for the day. And here's the thing. In your village, pigs aren't just livestock. They're personalities. Henrietta is that aunt who drinks too much and tells family secrets at weddings. Everyone loves her, fears her, and no one ever tells her what to do. Which brings us to your current status, barefoot, breathless, holding a spoon like a weapon, whispering promises of carrots and apples and eternal affection if she would just this once go back into the pen. She doesn't. Instead, she saunters toward the baker's yard. And you remember something important. The baker left the oven door open this morning. You sprint. But Henrietta sprints faster. You don't see what happens next. There's a cloud of flour, a shriek, and a chicken that may or may not have lost its will to live. But the baker emerges covered in dough, shaking a fist. Again, you nod. He mutters something that might be a curse or a baking measurement. Henrietta trots out covered in flour, wearing what looks like half a pastry on her head. She looks magnificent. She looks untouchable. Eventually, you corner her near the duck pond. You hold out a carrot. She pauses. The villagers lean in. She sniffs it, then turns away. You throw your arms up defeated. And finally, Henrietta turns around and walks into the pen. On her own terms, like a monarch returning to court, you close the gate, double knot the rope. You rest your forehead against the wood and exhale until you hear the smallest squeak. You turn. The piglet, the little one, gone. Somewhere out there in the village, a small pink agent of chaos is learning from the best, and you realize this is not the end. It's only the first squeal of many. Historical fact of the night. Medieval farmers did build elaborate pig pens, often with dry stone walls and double gates. But pigs were clever escape artists. Some even learned to lift latches. Odd side detail. In 1386, a pig in France was actually put on trial for murder. It was dressed in human clothes and executed in the town square. So, yeah, Henrietta's little rampage is practically tame. Academic debate. Some scholars argue that animal trials were more symbolic than legal, representing society's need to assign moral order to chaos. Others suggest they were just weirdly enthusiastic ways to entertain a justice-starved peasantry. Either way, the pig got loose again, and you'll be chasing echoes of her squeals in your dreams. The cabbage never stood a chance. It's early morning again, and the dew still clings to everything, like guilt on a Sunday. You're in the middle of a half-eaten breakfast barley porridge, unseasoned, slightly judgmental, when a neighbor bursts into your doorway, panting and red-faced. She's in the cabbages. You don't need to ask who. You don't even ask whose cabbages. You just grab your cloak and your stick and start running. You reach the monastery garden faster than expected, probably due to the adrenaline, or maybe because your legs now have a muscle memory for pig chasing. As you crest the stone path, you hear it, the unmistakable crunch squish of Henrietta, chewing through something someone once watered with hope. The monk stands nearby, frozen. His hands are lifted in despair. His face is locked in that expression people have when they realize their life's work is being repurposed as pig brunch. You slide to a stop heart-pounding cloak askew. Henrietta pauses in her cabbage massacre only to look up and blink slowly like a queen acknowledging the arrival of a mildly useful servant. You whisper, "Henrietta, no." She steps onto another cabbage and begins what you can only describe as a deliberate wiggle. It's not hunger. It's performance art. The monk turns to you. She ate the holy cabbage. You blink. The what cabbage? The one I was cultivating for Brother Thomas. He said it had spiritual potential. You both stare at Henrietta as she snorts a bit of dirt up her nose, then tramples the remaining stalk with enthusiastic indifference. You try coaxing her with a piece of apple. She sniffs it once, grunts, and then resumes chewing the monk's sandal. You try pulling her away. She sits. You try reasoning. She yawns. Eventually, the monk sighs and says he forgives her. You're not sure if he means it, but he hands you a blessed radish as a consolation prize. You leave with a leash tied to Henrietta's belly and a sense of humility deeper than the cabbage patch. The monk offers you a final word as you depart. She has conviction. You nod. That's one word for it. Back in the village, someone has carved a new sign and nailed it to the square. Beware cabbage, not safe. Pig loose. Again, it's oddly poetic, possibly a haiku. Henrietta seems pleased. She walks with a sway and her step cabbage leaf still stuck to her ear. The piglet follows her like a shadow made of trouble. You try not to think about what's next, but you think it anyway. Because if there's one thing that history and pigs teach us, it's that the second you feel like you've got control, someone or something pink and round is already 2 steps ahead. Historical fact of the night monasteries in the Middle Ages did grow cabbage in large quantities, often believing certain vegetables had spiritual or healing properties. Monks were some of the most advanced gardeners of the time. Quirky detail. Some monastic gardens were arranged in symbolic layouts, crosses, circles, or sacred geometry. There's at least one surviving manuscript where a monk drew angry marginalia of a pig eating his lettuce. Academic dispute. Some historians argue the monastic obsession with orderly gardens reflected a desire to impose divine order on the chaos of nature. Others believe they were just very into salads. Either way, tonight, cabbage was chaos, and Henrietta was the gardener. There's something suspicious about the loaf. You notice it before anyone says a word, before the baker starts shouting, before the piglet squeals from beneath the flour sack, and definitely before the butter knife gets involved. Let's rewind. It's market day. You arrive early, hoping to trade eggs for onion bulbs, and possibly convince someone to part with a pair of wooden shoes that don't feel like punishment. The sun is just peeking over the thatch roofs. The geese are still half asleep. And the baker is glowing with smugness. He has a new loaf on display. Large, golden, suspiciously warm. Too warm. You squint at it, and then you hear it. Not a crunch, a snort, a tiny flour-dusted snort. Before you can process what that means, the loaf wiggles, and then it squeals. The crowd gasps. A woman drops her turnips. A child claps in delight. The piglet explodes from beneath the crust like a doughy miracle. It lands on the table, slides through the butter dish, and vanishes under the cart. The baker screams. It was proofing, I swear. It was proofing chaos breaks out. You dive after the piglet. It leads you on a flour-dusted chase through the square, under tables, over a cabbage pile, through the choir boy's legs, and directly into the mayor's cloak. The mayor does not find this amusing. You finally corner the piglet behind the wheelbarrow, breathing like someone who's aged a year in 30 seconds. You pick it up. It licks your nose. Henrietta appears from nowhere like an ominous godmother. You try to explain. I didn't put her in the dough. Henrietta blinks once, as if to say she made her own choices. The baker, meanwhile, is having a minor identity crisis. She was inside the bread. You nod. She does that sometimes. Historical fact of the night medieval markets did have strict rules about food preparation. Bakers were subject to public shaming if their loaves were underweight or poorly made. The assize of bread was a real law regulating size, quality, and price. Odd historical detail. In some towns, bakers who cheated customers had their bad loaves nailed to their door as a warning or were paraded through the streets with bread hung around their neck. Academic debate. Some scholars believe the baker's punishments served as moral theater, reinforcing the idea of a fair economy. Others argue it was simply a way to create drama on slow Thursdays. Either way, today's drama involves a piglet inside a loaf. The mayor issues a formal sigh. You apologize to the baker. Henrietta takes a bite out of the broken loaf. You consider leaving the piglet in the stocks as a warning. You don't. Instead, you carry her home, covered in flour, smelling of yeast. The townspeople now whisper two words when they see your pigs: unleavened terror. And honestly, they're not wrong. The goats were not part of the plan. You wake up with a sense of foreboding, like the kind you get when your chickens are unusually quiet, or when Henrietta starts humming. She doesn't technically hum, but that's the only way to describe the sound she makes when scheming. Today, the mayor has summoned you. He wants your help. That's how you know things are truly deeply wrong. You trudge up the hill to his estate, which is only slightly larger than your entire village. The fence surrounding it is new, freshly painted, proud, and very, very broken. Two panels are missing. One is upside down. The third is still technically attached, but leaning against a wheelbarrow like it's given up on everything. You see hoof prints, and something worse, cloven hoof prints. Two kinds. The mayor meets you at the gate, face pale, wig powdered. She made an alliance, he says. You blink. Henrietta. He nods. With goats. You'd laugh, but the evidence is right there. Nibbled roses, hoof scratches on the kitchen door, and one very startled maid who claims she saw a pig riding a goat. It probably wasn't that literal. Probably. The mayor leads you to the scene of the crime, his prized vegetable bed, or what's left of it. Carrots torn up, leeks trampled, one beetroot suspiciously polished. Henrietta stands at the far end, basking. 3 goats surround her like tiny knights. One of them burps. The mayor points at the pig. I want her banished. You sigh. She lives here. He adjusts his cravat. Then you're banished. You don't have time to explain the flaws in his jurisdiction. You do, however, offer to handle the situation before dinner. He agrees, with the kind of dignity only a man covered in radish leaves can muster. So, you face them. Henrietta. The goats. The standoff begins. You try logic. You try bribery. You try guilt, reminding her of that time you pulled a thorn from her hoof, and she grunted softly in what you still believe was gratitude. She ignores you. The goats start eating the mayor's laundry. Eventually, you try Plan D distraction via tambourine. It's a desperate move, but it works. One goat panics. Another starts dancing. Henrietta trots toward the sound like it's a dinner bell. You lead them out the gate, tambourine, jingling dignity, trailing behind you like a broken sandal. The mayor watches in silence. As you leave, he mutters, "We're never speaking of this again." You nod. Of course. But you know he'll tell everyone at the next harvest feast, and so will you. Because once a pig forms a goat alliance and overthrows your mayor's radish bed, you kind of have to. Historical fact of the night goats were incredibly common on medieval farms due to their adaptability, milk production, and ability to eat almost anything, including things they probably shouldn't. They were often left to roam freely, which caused predictable results. Weird detail. Some medieval bestiaries claimed goats could see through walls, leap over entire villages, and cry tears that cured blindness. Most of this was probably metaphor, unless goats had superpowers we've since lost. Academic debate. Some historians argue pigs and goats were symbolic of base instincts and chaos in medieval literature. Thus, their unruly behavior was both feared and culturally reinforced. Others think they were just really hard to fence in. Either way, Henrietta just built a coalition. And you're beginning to suspect she's planning something bigger. You walk home tambourine first pig in tow and whisper a quiet promise. No more vegetables. Not today. There's a knight in your yard. That's never a good sign. He's polishing his boots on your firewood and leaning dramatically on a sword that's mostly decorative. His horse looks embarrassed. You can relate. You approach slowly, hoping this isn't another trial by combat situation. The last time that happened, you had to throw stale bread at a cobbler until someone cried. The knight speaks. "I demand justice." You blink. For what? He turns slowly, pointing a finger as if revealing the villain in a mystery play. "For the pie." There's a pause. Then he elaborates with full chest and wounded dignity, "The gooseberry pie." You wait, then nod politely, as if this clears things up. He adds, "Your pig ate it." You look at Henrietta. She's lounging under the laundry line like a sunbathing duchess. There's a suspicious smear of jam on her snout. The night continues. "It was cooling on my windowsill." A sacred tradition in my household. You want to argue that gooseberry pie is not sacred, but the man has a sword and a handlebar mustache. He reaches into a pouch and slaps down a scroll. You squint. It's parchment with a seal, wax, embossed. This is a formal charge. You've been summoned to trial. Pig v. Pie. That afternoon, half the village gathers in the square. There's a chair for Henrietta, a stool for you, and a hay bale for the judge, who is technically the miller's uncle, but owns a hat with a feather, which makes him the obvious choice. The knight lays out the facts. There was a pie. There was a pig. There is no longer a pie. You counter. There is also no fence around your kitchen. Murmurs from the crowd. Henrietta oinks. The judge nods solemnly. The knight produces evidence a pie tin licked clean. You produce counter-evidence a bucket of apples Henrietta didn't eat, proving restraint. The judge calls for character witnesses. The town baker steps forward. She once shared her truffle with a duck. Strong point. Then the cobbler adds, "But she also ate my wife's sandals." Weak point. Finally, the mayor delivers a monologue about moral decay and goat uprisings. No one really knows what side he's on, but he uses the word civic collapse, which gets a few claps, the judge thinks, then announces a compromise. Henrietta is guilty, but only mildly. Her sentence 1 week of supervised village duty and no pie privileges. Henrietta bows her head. The crowd disperses. You walk home with her beside you, silent, thoughtful, jam-stained. Later that evening, you catch her staring at the moon. You wonder if she's thinking about the pie. Or revenge. Historical fact of the night trials involving animals actually occurred in medieval Europe. Pigs, goats, and even insects were tried for crimes ranging from theft to murder. Some were acquitted. Some were hanged no seriously. Weird detail. In one case, from 1386, a pig in France was dressed in human clothes and executed for allegedly killing a child. The town even paid for new pants for the occasion. Academic debate. Some scholars argue these trials were symbolic rituals affirming social order. Others say they reflect a pre-modern understanding of agency and blame animals were part of the moral ecosystem, like everyone else. So yes, Henrietta had her day in court. And you had to testify that your pig was emotionally capable of regret. You're not sure what's more ridiculous, the trial or the fact that she won. You should have known something was wrong the moment the bell rang twice. It never rings twice. Not unless the bishop is visiting or the roof is on fire. And last time, it turned out to be both because the bishop lit incense near the thatched eaves. Classic bishop move. Today, though, the bell rings twice and insistently, like it's being pulled by someone who has very strong feelings about laundry. You follow the sound toward the cathedral. You're not religious, exactly, more cautiously superstitious, with a side of reluctant respect. But you do know better than to ignore a bell that sounds like a goat is ringing it, which, as it turns out, is not far off. Because when you arrive at the church, Henrietta is already there, standing on the altar, wearing somehow a velvet carpet, draped like a cape, looking like the Archbishop of Chaos. You freeze. The priest is also frozen. Everyone is frozen, really, except for Henrietta, who is currently drinking holy water out of the baptismal font. You whisper, "Please tell me that's not wine." The priest whispers back, "We ran out of wine." You sigh. Turns out this all started with a bucket, specifically your bucket, which you loaned to the sacristan because he needed to mop the nave. You remember this because you charged him 2 turnips and a compliment. "Your eyebrows are powerful," he had said. But this morning, the bucket was missing. Not stolen, not misplaced, just missing. And now, here it is, balanced on Henrietta's back, filled with breadcrumbs and rose petals. The bucket, it seems, has been reconsecrated by pig. Henrietta trots past you like she owns the nave, leaving tiny hoof prints on the cathedral carpet, hence the cape. Someone clearly tried to mop with her, then gave up and draped the entire rug over her body like a compromise. You chase her gently. She evades like a monk avoiding temptation. She disappears into the side chapel. You follow and find her staring at a stained glass window. She looks pensive, maybe even moved. Or maybe she's just admiring the colors. She nudges a candlestick. You snatch it just in time. The priest appears behind you, coughing politely. You brace for judgment. But instead, he says, "Do you think she'd like a job?" You blink. "A what?" He nods solemnly. Attendance is down. But when she comes, people gather. You look at Henrietta, then at the half-eaten hymn book, then back at the priest. You nod slowly. She accepts the position on one condition. He raises an eyebrow. She keeps the carpet. Historical fact of the night, medieval churches were often community centers, as well as places of worship. Animals, particularly cats, dogs, and even pigs, could wander in and out, especially in smaller villages. Weird detail. There's a record from 15th century Germany of a pig that repeatedly interrupted sermons by sleeping in the nave. It became a local legend and was eventually named Brother Oink. Academic debate. Some historians argue that the blending of sacred and profane spaces in medieval rural life shows how spirituality was deeply interwoven with daily experience. Others believe pigs simply knew where the warmth was. Either way, Henrietta now has her own corner pew. And every Sunday, people come to see the pig in velvet. She still eats the candles, but only the unscented ones. You head home bucket in hand, pride questionable, and remind yourself when the bell rings twice. Check the carpet. It starts with a thud. A very specific kind of thud, dull, final, and slightly smug. You've learned to distinguish these over time. This one says, something just broke that you can't afford to replace. You turn slowly toward the barn, then the silo. Then, oh no, there is a pig-shaped hole in the grain silo. Not pig-sized, not pig-created, pig-shaped. You know this because there's an actual outlined snout ears trotters. Even the tail curl is visible in splintered wood. It's oddly elegant, like performance art, but hungry. Henrietta stands nearby, chewing with deep satisfaction. She's surrounded by a small, admiring audience of ducks, chickens, and one goat with a monocle. It's just a piece of broken glass, but the effect is undeniable. You stare at the scene, then you sit down and say very softly, "This is why we can't have nice things." Apparently, Henrietta decided she wanted breakfast before sunrise. And when the latch on the feed room didn't cooperate, she tried the grain silo. You estimate she reached terminal velocity at some point around the third somersault. Your grain is now pig marinated, and your storage system has acquired a new entrance. As you begin scooping kernels back into a sack, the mayor arrives. Because of course he does. He looks at the hole, then the pig, then you. Then unblinking says, "We're expecting a tax inspector tomorrow." You freeze. "I'm sorry." What he adjusts his sash, which is made of ribbon and denial. Yes, he's doing surprise audits, counting grain stores, checking for irregularities. You gesture broadly. "You mean like this?" He nods. "Exactly like this." You consider bribery, escape, time travel. Instead, you offer the mayor a cup of tea and a seat. Then you begin planning. Step 1, distraction. You drape a curtain over the hole. Step 2, illusion. You pile sacks of slightly less contaminated grain in front of it. Step 3, confidence. You give Henrietta a bath polish her hooves and set her in front of the barn like a welcome mascot. Step 4, hope. The inspector arrives the next morning. He's wearing 3 capes and a nose ring. He doesn't speak. He sniffs. Then he walks in, stares at your grain pile, prods a sack, sniffs again. Then he freezes. Henrietta is right behind him staring. She oinks, loudly. The inspector turns pale, then paler. Then he bows and says, "My apologies, high swine." You blink. He backs away, leaves, doesn't say a word. You shut the barn door very slowly, then turn to Henrietta. "I don't know what just happened." She snorts. You think she does. Historical fact of the night grain silos in the Middle Ages were usually simple wooden or stone structures, and protecting them from animals was a constant battle. Rats, pigs, and even squirrels were notorious for breaking into them. Weird detail: some abbeys had grain guardians, not monks, but specially trained dogs, or even aggressive geese tasked with chasing away intruders. One record from 1273 describes a goose that patrolled a granary and bit any thief, human or not. Academic debate. There's argument over how centralized grain storage really was in rural villages. Some historians claim most peasants kept grain in small private bins, while others think community stores were more common. Either way, they were frequently breached. So now, you have a new to-do list: fix the silo, buy more grain, and maybe get Henrietta her own office. You're starting to think she's running the village now, and honestly, you're not even mad, just hungry. You find the turnip first, wrapped in silk, lying on your doorstep, with a tiny bough and a note. You pause. This is either the most romantic gesture in village history or a deeply confusing threat. You pick up the turnip carefully, like it might explode into poetry. The note is written in flowery smudges and questionable grammar. To the fair one, who smells of hay and mystery, your eyes outshine the moon. Your feet are sturdy like a good fence. Meet me by the well at sunset. Bring the pig. You look at Henrietta. She looks back innocent. Too innocent. You narrow your eyes. She blinks slowly, then trots to her mud puddle with the theatrical calm of someone who absolutely knows what's going on. So, you're being wooed, and your pig is apparently part of the arrangement. You wonder if it's that shepherd's apprentice again, the one who tried to impress you last spring by juggling eels. It ended badly. For the eels, at sunset, you do as the note suggests. You wear your least muddy tunic, and Henrietta wears, well, mud. You arrive at the well. No one is there. Then from behind a haystack emerges the baker's son, holding flowers. Also, another turnip. He bows deeply. You nod politely, trying not to inhale the overwhelming scent of yeast. He begins to speak, but Henrietta oinks, loudly, then charges, straight toward his basket, because inside it are pastries. There's a chaotic moment. Turnip rolls, flowers scatter. The baker's son flails. Henrietta seizes the tart and trots away like a ballerina who's just won the lottery. You help him up. He sighs. I just wanted to write something beautiful. You pat his shoulder. Start with not mentioning my feet. Historical fact of the night. Love letters in the Middle Ages were surprisingly common. Courtly love poetry flourished, and even peasants exchanged tokens, often food-based, like apples, bread, or yes, turnips. Weird detail. In one 14th century English record, a farmer proposed marriage by carving a heart into a cheese wheel and leaving it in the woman's hayloft. She said yes, probably because the cheese was aged. Academic debate. Some scholars believe expressions of love among peasants were just as layered and symbolic as noble romances, if not more so. Others argue that records are too sparse, and we tend to romanticize everything with a feather quill. Back in the village, word spreads. You're now the turnip heartbreaker. Henrietta is the dessert thief. You decide to lean into it. You start wearing a flower in your cap. Henrietta starts wearing crumbs. You get another note the next week, from someone else. It's wrapped in cabbage this time. You sigh. This is your life now. Flirty vegetables and a pig with a fan club. You wonder if this counts as fame. Probably not. But you do get free bread on Thursdays now. You had only wanted a bath. Just one peaceful soak. A brief break from the never-ending parade of chores, mud grain-based disasters, and love letters attached to root vegetables. You didn't ask for much, just hot water, some privacy, and a bucket that didn't scream. But that, of course, is not what you got. It starts with a bucket. Because in your village, the bathhouse isn't a building. It's more like a glorified hut with ambition. A timber-framed shack with a slightly collapsed roof and a steam system powered by the hopes and dreams of boiling rocks. The bathhouse attendant is a man named Gilbert, and he believes in two things: discipline and eucalyptus, which is why, as you approach with your soap towel and a carefully wrapped cake of rosemary lye, you hear him yelling, "That is not a ceremonial ladle." You round the corner, just in time to see Henrietta sprint out of the bathhouse trailing bubbles and steam a ladle stuck jauntily in her mouth like a fancy pirate with a wooden spoon. Gilbert is behind her, clutching a towel and a smudged book of herbal remedies, yelling something about cleansing rituals and pigs aren't licensed. You blink, then you sigh, then you follow. Henrietta leads you on a scenic tour of the village square, past the blacksmith's forge, where she knocks over a barrel of horseshoes, the bakery, where she briefly pauses to lick the flour bin, and finally back to the bathhouse, where she curls up inside a still warm washtub like nothing happened. Gilbert stares at her. You stare at him. He sighs defeated. She steamed all the mint leaves, he mutters. All of them. They're gone. The basil's traumatized. You look down at Henrietta. She blinks. You decide to take your bath anyway. Inside the bathhouse smells of damp moss and regret. Steam fogs the cracked windows. Buckets sit in various states of distress, each one filled with water of a different temperature and suspicious opacity. You choose the one that looks least like soup. As you settle in, a thought occurs to you. You may be clean on the outside, but internally, you're now 30% turnip, 40% anxiety, and 10% bathwater. The rest is just disbelief. Somewhere in the rafters, you hear Henrietta snort. Then there's a creak, a slow, deliberate creak. And then a bucket falls directly onto your head, which unfortunately is when Gilbert walks in with more hot water. He freezes. You freeze. The bucket stays. He nods solemnly. Ah, the ceremonial helmet. You remove the bucket. Henrietta oinks approvingly from her corner tub. Gilbert begins a speech about the history of hygiene in the Middle Ages, as if that will make this less awkward. You humor him, because you two are now a part of history, a very wet, slightly scented, bucket-headed part of it. Historical fact of the night communal bathhouses were common in medieval Europe, especially during the 12th to 14th centuries. Contrary to modern myth, many people did bathe, sometimes even weekly. Bathhouses often served as social hubs, and bath time could include meals, music, and even massages. Weird detail. In some German towns, bathhouses were co-ed, and people brought their own towels, utensils, and even pets. There's an account from 1386 in Nuremberg, where a goat wandered into the hot water and refused to leave, becoming the bathhouse's unofficial mascot. Academic debate. There's an ongoing scholarly conversation about whether the decline in public bathing during the later medieval period was due to increased association of bathhouses with immorality, or simply the spread of diseases like the plague and syphilis, making people wary of shared water. You don't know about the plague, but you do know that Henrietta just unplugged the drain with her teeth. Water whooshes. You scramble. Gilbert claps while you're not sure. Henrietta looks pleased. Outside the village, bell rings once, which usually signals either mealtime or someone's sheep is giving birth on the roof again. You step out of the bathhouse towel wrapped like a confused toga hair wet dignity minimal, and waiting for you. A small crowd. Apparently, Gilbert gave a running commentary from the window. You nod to them, like a monarch freshly bathed. Henrietta follows behind you, still slightly foamy. Someone applauds. You realize you're now the one who bathed with the pig and survived. It's not the title you wanted, but in this village, you take what you can get. Later that night, sitting by your fire, you wrap your clean feet in wool socks and stare at the stars through the crooked window frame. Henrietta snores gently beside you, smelling faintly of eucalyptus and defiance. You think about what it means to be clean in a world that's always muddy, about how even a bath becomes an adventure, and how nothing, not love letters, not grain silos, not buckets, ever goes according to plan. But at least you smell nice. For now, you smell smoke before you see it. That's never a good sign, especially in your village, where controlled fire usually means someone holding a torch and promising everything's fine. But today's smoke is special, because today is the festival of mostly unnecessary fire. It has other names: St. Osbert's Cleansing Light Ash Fest, or your personal favorite, the annual excuse to burn things. But everyone knows what it really means. Bonfires. Everywhere. You emerge from your cottage cautiously half-dressed, still brushing hay out of your tunic. Henrietta follows, tail wagging ominously. She's wearing her festival ribbon, which is less a fashion statement and more a please, don't roast me by mistake precaution. In the village square, the excitement is already at fever pitch. Children are stacking kindling like tiny pyromaniacs in training. The blacksmith is polishing a ceremonial torch with unsettling enthusiasm. A goose has already caught fire and is now being chased by 3 monks and a surprisingly fast widow. You blink. The village elder stands on a barrel, shouting inspirational phrases like, "Cleanse the spirits and purge the mildew, and don't throw your taxes into the fire again." Walter, the fire master, an honorary title usually given to the least flammable person in town, approaches with a list of items deemed in need of sacred combustion. It includes 5 moldy boots, an out-of-tune lute, 1 suspiciously damp mattress, a wooden spoon shaped like a duck, a painting of St. Osbert with a missing nose, 7 old hats, a bundle labeled "Mystery Potatoes Do Not Open." You offer up an extra turnip sack and a broken stool. Henrietta tries to offer the baker's hat she stole last week. You discreetly remove it from the pile. Fire, after all, is for cleansing, not starting inter-village hat feuds. As the sun begins to dip, the torches are lit, and suddenly flames bloom across the fields like orange wildflowers. Everything glows. Everything crackles. Everything starts to feel a little out of hand, because Walter, the same man who mistook a cow for his wife during last year's maypole dance, has added his tax ledger to the flames. Again, you step in to stop him, but it's too late. A flaming gust catches the pages and whirls them into the sky like bureaucratic butterflies. The village cheers. The tax collector, standing 3 feet away, weeps. Henrietta, meanwhile, is having the time of her life. She dances in the embers like a pig-shaped fire sprite, oinking triumphantly each time something collapses into ash. And that's when someone yells, "The grain! Shed!" You turn. You squint. You groan, because someone, probably Walter, has placed the entire grain shed door into the fire. Just the door. Not the grain. Not the shed. Just the one part you actually needed to keep out animals' rain and judgment. You run toward the fire pile shouting, "We need that door," but you are too late. The door gives a dramatic crack, sparks burst skyward, and a monk throws in a wheel of cheese for good luck. You stand there speechless. The elder claps you on the shoulder. "Symbolic renewal," he says. You nod, then whisper, symbolically, "I'm now very hungry and slightly homeless." Historical fact of the night. Bonfire festivals were common throughout medieval Europe, often tied to seasonal celebrations, saint days, or pre-Christian traditions. Fire symbolized purification, rebirth, and community. Objects were burned to rid the village of bad luck, sin, or simply to clean house. Weird detail. In parts of rural France and Spain, people jumped over the fires to ensure fertility, good crops, or in one case, better cheese. In some villages, livestock were herded between two fires for protection. This usually just confused the livestock. Academic debate. Scholars argue over how pagan these fire festivals truly were. Some say they're direct descendants of solstice and equinox rituals. Others claim the church absorbed and rebranded them, giving sacred legitimacy to ancient traditions while preserving the fun of setting stuff on fire. Back in the square, things are heating up. Literally. A man has tried to roast sausages over the sacred flame and accidentally summoned a group of very opinionated nuns. Someone else is throwing dried flowers into the fire and shouting names of people who owe him money. Henrietta is now wearing a crown of slightly scorched daisies. She looks majestic. You sit on a crate with your half-roasted stool and try to enjoy the flickering spectacle. It's kind of beautiful in a chaotic, smoke-scented way. For one night, nobody's worried about pigs in the grain, or taxes, or who stole whose bread dough. Everyone is watching the same fire, laughing, cheering, breathing in the smell of old boots and mystery potatoes. You lean back, legs, stretched out hands behind your head, and you think for all its absurdity, this place has warmth, not just the fire kind, but the kind that sits somewhere behind your ribs and makes you feel, despite everything, home. That's when a flaming hat lands in your lap. You yelp. Henrietta oinks. The blacksmith yells, "That's my ceremonial bonnet." And the village erupts again in laughter music and a few more slightly panicked fire drills. The flames will die by dawn. But tonight, the whole world glows. You don't normally attend the village council meetings. Not because you're uninterested. Oh no. They're deeply educational in the sense that you learn what not to do when trying to govern. But because they usually end with a duel over the definition of the word urgent. But today is different. Today, the meeting is mandatory, which means something has gone terribly wrong. You arrive late, slightly breathless, holding a piece of dry bread in your mouth and wearing yesterday's tunic, which is somehow also tomorrow's. Henrietta trails behind you, carrying a bucket for emotional support. The meeting is held in the chapel barn, half chapel, half barn, all draft. The pews are uneven. The candles are waxy with despair, and the mood is already 5 parts suspicion. To 1 part, did someone sit in goat droppings again? At the front sits the village council, Elder Thibault, chair of things, Mistress Odette, keeper of complaints, Brother Mauger, spiritual advisor and onion collector, and for some reason, Guillaume the Hatless, who was only invited because he brings snacks. You find a seat between the baker's apprentice and a chicken. The chicken is wearing spectacles. The meeting begins with Elder Thibault banging a wooden spoon on a turnip. This is traditional. This session is called He Says Gravely because the mooing spoon has returned. There is silence. A long, slow silence punctuated only by the sound of Henrietta licking the bucket. Then someone whispers, "Oh no, not again." You chew your bread thoughtfully. The mooing spoon. You've heard the legends. A long-lost piece of cursed kitchenware said to moo like a cow at unpredictable hours. It was blamed for 3 marriages failing a week-long cheese shortage and the mysterious case of the exploding leek stew. It was last seen 5 years ago, flung into the swamp with great ceremony, and 2 verses of a cautionary ballad. Apparently, it's back. Mistress Odette holds up a burlap-wrapped object and dramatically unwraps it. There it is, a regular spoon. But as soon as she places it on the table, moo! The entire chapel barn recoils. The chicken faints. You cough breadcrumbs into your sleeve. Brother Mauger crosses himself with an onion. Elder Thibault holds up the spoon like it's a cursed relic from a long-lost kitchen dimension. We found it, he says, in the soup cauldron. During breakfast service. Gasps all around. Did anyone eat the soup? Someone asks. Odette nods grimly. Walter had 2 bowls. A moment of silence for Walter. The discussion begins. Proposals are made. Bury the spoon under the stone circle. Boil it in holy water and mint tea. Catapult it into the next village again. Bake it into a pie and serve it to the traveling merchants. Arguments break out. The baker suggests it's not the real mooing spoon, but a copycat. The blacksmith suggests reforging it into a cowbell. Guillaume just offers pickled eggs. You raise your hand. All heads turn. You swallow the last of your bread and say, "What if we keep it?" Gasps again. Henrietta oinks in solidarity. You continue emboldened. What if instead of fearing it, we understand it? Perhaps the mooing spoon is just misunderstood. Maybe it wants to help. Maybe it's lonely. The spoon moves softly, almost shyly. The room is stunned. Mistress Odette narrows her eyes. You want us to befriend the mooing utensil? You nod. Like a neighbor. You nod again. Guillaume offers a snack to the spoon. It moos appreciatively. And somehow, just like that, the mood shifts. The spoon is passed around. It moos at the blacksmith, twice snorts at the onion collector, and emits a low hum near the chicken, who has regained consciousness and now appears mildly enchanted. Historical fact of the night medieval superstition extended deeply into daily life, including objects. People believed that certain tools or items could be cursed, blessed, or even sentient. Household items were often blamed for bad luck, illness, or family disputes, especially if they made noise or moved inexplicably. Sometimes these objects were given names, personalities, and elaborate rituals to appease them. Weird detail. In 13th century England, there are records of villagers accusing a butter churn of being possessed because it made sounds like a frog attempting speech. It was exorcised by a priest and then thrown into a river where it allegedly floated upstream. Academic debate. Historians continue to discuss how much medieval object anxiety was rooted in genuine belief versus local custom or oral storytelling. Some argue these tales helped communities manage fear and make sense of random misfortunes. Others see it as a form of shared entertainment, kind of like dinner theater, but with more onions. Back in the chapel barn, the mooing spoon is now sitting on a velvet pillow surrounded by small offerings, a crust of bread, a wilted flower, and a drawing of a cow by a child who believes the spoon is magic. but tired. Henrietta licks it. It moos softly, then goes silent. Elder Thibault declares, "Perhaps it is at peace." A vote is taken. The mooing spoon will not be destroyed, catapulted, or hidden. It will be placed in the village archive next to the scroll of perpetual misunderstandings and the infamous wheel of cheese that won't age. The meeting is adjourned with a final bang of the turnip. Outside, the night is cool and faintly sweet, as if the spoon has absorbed the chaos and left only calm. You walk home with Henrietta, the stars glittering like scattered flour in a dark kitchen. You feel something you didn't expect. Relief. Not just because the spoon didn't moo at you, though. That's part of it. But because your village, mad, muddy, and mildly cursed, came together to face absurdity with a straight face and a pickled egg. There's something comforting about that. Like knowing even your weirdest problems can be embraced. Back home, you tuck into your straw bed. Henrietta curls up beside the bucket. From somewhere in the distance, a faint, sleepy moo drifts through the air. You smile. The apples are falling upward again, which is not technically your fault. But also, you may have been involved. It all starts innocently enough, as it often does in your village, with a good intention, a questionable ladder, and a pig named Henrietta eyeing a barrel of fermenting cider like it owes her rent. You were simply helping old Benoit with his orchard harvest. His back has been angry since the Great Chair incident, and his eyesight is now decorative, which means most of the apple picking falls to you. Literally. The morning begins like any other dewy grass birds chirping off-key. Henrietta, attempting to balance 3 apples on her head for reasons she refuses to explain. But by noon, something's odd. You climb the tree for one last apple. You reach. You pluck. You feel proud. Then the apple, instead of dropping, floats gently upward. You blink. You release it. It ascends like a smug little balloon, wobbling skyward and spinning slightly as if trying to show off its stem. You shout for Benoit. He shuffles over, squints at the apple now hovering above the branches, and mutters, "Well, that's new." Another apple detaches, also floats. Then 3 more. Then an entire basket. You look at Benoit. Benoit looks at Henrietta. Henrietta is licking the cider barrel. A conclusion is silently reached. Something is wrong with the apples. Word spreads quickly. Within the hour, the orchard is full of villagers staring upward as dozens of apples hover just above the trees, like tiny red moons. Children throw sticks at them. The blacksmith attempts to catch one with a net. Brother Mauger accuses the apples of vanity. Theories abound. The orchard is cursed. The apples are trying to escape. Gravity is on strike. It's the work of the mooing spoon. You suggest maybe the cider is weird. Mistress Odette says the apples float. Your logic does not. You sigh. Historical fact of the night medieval Europe was full of supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. If fruit behaved strangely, it could be blamed on witchcraft, divine intervention, or fairy mischief. Floating or glowing produce would often be viewed with suspicion or reverence. Weird detail. In 14th century Bohemia, a village reported singing pears that made soft whistling sounds during storms. The villagers built a shrine to them. Later investigation revealed the pears had been hollowed out by wasps. The shrine remained for 73 years. Academic debate. Scholars argue whether these stories reflect real anomalies or just the medieval tendency to interpret strange occurrences through mystical lenses. Some believe such tales were tools for storytelling, community bonding, or even social control. Others point out that fermented fruit can behave oddly, especially when combined with weather insects and local wine. Back to your apples. By late afternoon, the trees are practically fruitless, but the sky is full. Henrietta has stopped licking the cider barrel and is now eyeing the apples like she's considering a career in aerial acrobatics. You take stock. The apples aren't going far. They're hovering, like they've forgotten what gravity is supposed to do. Some bounce gently against clouds. One tries to land on the chapel spire, but is shooed away by a very irritable crow. Then, the villagers begin to accept it. The baker sets up a ladder stand to sell heaven apples extra light. The children tie ribbons to the floating apples and make wishes. The cobbler sets up an apple-catching competition, which mostly involves throwing shoes at them. You sit beneath a tree and wonder if you've accidentally invented the world's first levitating fruit stand. Henrietta lies beside you, burps, and a single apple from the ground lifts 2 inches, then settles. Okay, you say. That's definitely on you. Theories get weirder. Someone proposes that the apples are returning to Eden. Another thinks they've become angels. Elder Thibault simply writes apples in his ledger and goes back to staring at the sky with quiet judgment. Then as the sun begins to set, something changes. The apples begin to descend, slowly, one by one, softly falling like snowflakes. The children cheer. The blacksmith is hit in the head. The baker cries, "It's a sign you catch one." You take a bite. It tastes perfect, crisp, sweet. Somehow, better than before. The villagers eat cautiously at first, then enthusiastically, then with applesauce on their noses. Henrietta is surrounded by cores and looks pleased with herself. By nightfall, the orchard is empty. The sky is clear, and the only thing floating is your sense of what is or isn't normal anymore. You walk home full content and only slightly nervous that tomorrow your cabbages might try to walk. Still, you think if apples can float and fall and taste this good after defying physics, maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're just meant to be savored, like fruit from a tree that doesn't quite follow the rules. You drift to sleep, thinking of sky fruit cider dreams and the possibility that just maybe the laws of nature in your village are more like guidelines. Tonight the cows refuse to sleep, which normally wouldn't concern you. You're not their therapist after all. But tonight is different, because tonight the cows are mooing in unison. 12 moos. Exactly. Then silence. Then 12 again. Like a choral arrangement if the choir consisted of overly emotional cows with excellent timing. It begins just past midnight. You're almost asleep, face buried in a pillow that smells like clean hay and yesterday's soup when you hear it. Moo. Pause. Moo. 10 more times. You sit up. Henrietta grunts from the straw pile. She's annoyed. That's rich coming from a pig who once snored so loudly the chimney collapsed in protest. You count 12 moos. Again. Every 5 minutes. Like a clock that tells you exactly when to start worrying. You throw on your cloak, light a lantern, and head out into the night. Outside, the moon is full and low, casting everything in a silvery glow that makes the village look like it's been lightly dusted with dream sugar. The cows are all standing in the field perfectly still, facing the same direction, each one staring toward the old stone bell tower on the edge of town. This is, of course, highly suspicious behavior for cows. You look around, no one else is out. Either you're the only one who heard it, or the only one foolish enough to investigate. You glance back at Henrietta. She's now following you, dragging a piece of celery like a wand and humming ominously through her snout. You make your way across the dewy grass to the herd. As you approach, the cows turn together to look at you. Then, moo times 12. Then silence. You wave awkwardly. Nice evening. The cows blink and turn back to the bell tower. You sigh. Historical fact of the night. In medieval Europe, animals were often believed to possess spiritual or supernatural awareness. A cow mooing at night wasn't just noisy, it was meaningful. Entire local rituals were designed around interpreting cow behavior. In some regions, if cows lowed at midnight on Christmas, it was believed they were speaking to the baby Jesus. In others, synchronized animal behavior was seen as a harbinger of natural disaster. Weird detail. There's a 15th century manuscript from northern France that details a trial held for a goose accused of summoning storms with honks of unnatural rhythm. Witnesses testified under oath. The goose was acquitted due to lack of motive. Academic debate. Historians remain divided on whether these beliefs were genuine spiritual anxieties or community coping mechanisms. Some argue these interpretations reflect a society deeply connected to animals and nature. Others suggest it was a clever way to blame livestock for things like spoiled grain or bad dreams. Back to your mooing. You cross the field and climb the hill to the bell tower. It's ancient, mossy, and structurally questionable. Its bell hasn't rung since the Great Pancake Fire, which according to village records involved poor timing hot oil and the mistaken belief that pancakes should be dramatic. You enter cautiously. The door creaks. Naturally. Inside, the air is thick with dust, the kind that feels older than you, and possibly self-aware. You climb the stairs. Henrietta stays below. She doesn't do ladders. It's a policy. At the top, the bell looms overhead, tangled in cobwebs and ivy. You expect silence. Instead, you hear ticking. No, not a clock. More like clicking. You shine your lantern. On the inner wall behind the bell is a small wooden panel. It's moving. You pry it open. Behind it sits a tiny mechanism. Gears. Levers. A small wooden cow. It's a machine. You blink. The wooden cow head nods once. A tiny mallet hits a chime. Moo. Then again. 12 times. You watch stunned. Someone built a mechanical moo clock inside the bell tower and set it to midnight. Henrietta oinks in outrage from below. You descend and explain the situation to the cows. They seem unimpressed. One sneezes. You return the next day with Elder Thibault, Mistress Odette, and the blacksmith. They all stare at the moo machine. Elder Thibault frowns. This wasn't here last week. Odette gasps. Was it? The spoon. The blacksmith looks proud. I always said cows had rhythm. Guillaume brings snacks. You investigate. Inside the mechanism, you find a faded note tucked beneath the gears. It reads, "To those who hear the moos, be not afraid. It is only the hour of vigilance. We watch the skies, not the ground. Keep your buckets close." This raises several questions. Theories emerge. It's a long-forgotten alert system for watching the skies. It's an ancient cow cult ritual. It's performance art. Mistress Odette suggests burning the whole thing. You convince them to wait. The cows haven't mooed since. They seem satisfied. Henrietta spends the rest of the day glaring at the bell tower like it owes her rent. That night, you sit by your window, sipping lukewarm cider, wondering what it all meant. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe a joke. Maybe someone long ago just wanted to confuse future villagers. You can respect that. You fall asleep to the soft sounds of night birds and the occasional cow sigh. No moos, just peace. Until you hear a 13th moo. Soft, far, and definitely not from the tower. You smile. Henrietta sits up sharply, celery in hoof. You both stare into the dark. Sometimes you think mystery is just a polite way for the universe to say, surprise. And sometimes the cows are in on the joke. The bread has stopped rising, which in itself seems like a small problem. It's not like it screamed and ran away or anything. It's just not puffing, not inflating, not becoming the golden crusty loaf you were promised in the sacred scrolls of yeast-based snacks. But this is medieval village life. And when the bread won't rise, nothing rises. Not hope, not morale, not even the sun properly according to Elder Thibault, who's convinced it rose sideways this morning in protest. You first notice it when baking your weekly batch of loaves. The dough just sits there in the bowl, completely unbothered, emotionally flat, like it's in a bit of a mood. You give it time. You whisper encouragement. You hum a tune that's proven effective on turnips. Nothing. 3 hours later, it still resembles a damp pillow with performance anxiety. You poke it. It sighs. You blink. It sighs again. And that's when you know something's wrong. You bring it to the village square, because if history has taught you anything, it's that all mysterious issues must be observed by multiple villagers with conflicting opinions before anyone actually fixes anything. Odette gasps dramatically. Bread has fallen. Milo the shepherd sniffs it and pronounces, "Dead dough." Brother Mauger stares at it and begins muttering about the sins of flour pride. Even Henrietta snorts with unusual suspicion. You test it by baking the lump anyway. It comes out flatter than your cousin's attempt at a roof and twice as chewy. Historical fact of the night. Medieval Europe depended heavily on bread, particularly rye wheat and barley-based loaves. It wasn't just food. It was currency, communion, and comfort. Bad bread often led to riots, literally. A baker could be publicly punished or run out of town if their bread failed to meet expectations. Weird detail. In 1329, in the town of Lüneburg, a baker was fined for selling loaves that were too suspiciously smooth. His bread was accused of being bewitched because it was perfectly round. The fine 4 eggs and 2 apologies. Academic debate. Historians differ on how widespread such panic over baking truly was. Some argue that failed bread symbolized deeper communal fears of crop failure, of sin, of divine punishment. Others suggest bread simply held immense psychological power as one of the few reliable pleasures in a difficult life. When the dough gave up, so did the village morale. Back to your lifeless loaf. Theories abound. The yeast is cursed. The flour's been insulted. The oven has lost its spirit. Henrietta pushes the loaf with her snout. It slides but does not bounce. Someone suggests burying it. Another wants to exorcise it. You decide to visit Colette. Colette is the village's retired baker. She lives 3 fields away, surrounded by pigeons, sourdough starters, and an aura of smug correctness. She opens the door before you knock. "I smelled your failure," she says. You hold up the loaf. She frowns, takes it, pokes it, sniffs it, then places it gently in a wicker basket lined with lavender sprigs. I'll see what I can do, she mutters. She hands you a different lump of dough. Try this. You go home, bake. Wait, the dough doesn't rise either. You return to Colette's hut. She says. It's spreading. What's spreading? The stillness. Colette explains with the patient voice of someone who once made a three-tiered cake out of barley and sarcasm. That dough can be influenced by mood, weather, and local energy. You've heard of sourdough starter spirits, haven't you? She asks. You pretend you have. She explains that each batch carries part of the soul of the last one, like bread ancestry. If something disrupts the energy, say a fight among chickens or the wrong kind of moon, the yeast just gives up. It's sensitive, she says, stroking a jar of bubbling sponge. You go home and apologize to your kitchen. You light a candle. You hum a song to your flour. You ban Henrietta from licking the counter. She sulks under the table. Then you try again. Knead gently. Tuck the dough in a warm blanket. Tell it a bedtime story. You wait. And this time, you see it. A rise. A swell. The faintest dome of hope. You gasp. It jiggles. You run outside. You shout. The dough is rising. Villagers emerge from their homes. Someone faints. The bell is rung. Brother Mauger weeps softly and offers the dough a blessing. That evening, the village gathers for a small celebration. Flatbread is burned in effigy. The new loaf is passed around like a holy relic. You tear it open, and steam curls out like a sigh of relief from the flour gods. Henrietta gets the first bite. She nods solemnly. The crisis is over, but you'll never forget those hours of dough despair. The flatness, the judgment, the sound of a loaf exhaling. And when you lie in bed that night, belly full of victory, crumb, you wonder if bread can listen, can feel what else around you holds quiet awareness. You fall asleep, whispering your thanks to the butter dish, and dream of clouds made of crust and rain that smells faintly of warm rye. Somehow, you know tomorrow the bread will rise again. Because sometimes you just have to believe in the loaf. The well is speaking again, not bubbling, not echoing. Speaking. You first notice it when drawing water one morning. The sun's barely over the hills, the roosters are mid-yawn, and Henrietta is chewing a boot she definitely didn't own yesterday. You lower the bucket, let it splash into the darkness, and begin to crank it up. And that's when you hear it, a voice, dry papery but clear. It says, 3 legs in the morning, 2 in the night, but none when it rains. You freeze. Henrietta freezes. The bucket keeps rising. You blink at it. The water looks normal. You glance at the rope, the crank, the stone rim. All very wellish. Then the voice returns. Bring me a question I cannot answer, and I shall give you something better than water. Henrietta oinks and steps back. You glance at the bucket again, then lean over and whisper, Excuse me. The well chuckles. That's never ideal. You tell no one, of course. At first, you're already the villager who talked to haunted doe, chased synchronized cows, and once swore that a hedgehog insulted your hat. Adding converses with well might impact your social standing. But later that evening, while refilling a pail, the well repeats the riddle. And then another. If you eat me, I live. If you drink me, I die. What am I? It waits almost expectantly. You whisper, fire. There's a pause. Then correct. Well done. The pail overflows with unusually clear, cool water. You start visiting more often. Historical fact of the night: wells in medieval times weren't just practical, they were spiritual. Many were believed to be enchanted or blessed by saints. Pilgrims traveled miles to drink from talking wells, singing springs, or wells that weep. Some towns appointed guardians of sacred wells, who maintained them, decorated them with flowers, and interpreted any strange behavior, bubbles, ripples, or mysterious voices as divine signs. Weird detail: in 1371, a well in Somerset was declared a holy oracle after 3 different villagers claimed it spoke Latin proverbs during thunderstorms. It was later discovered that a monk had built a sound pipe from the nearby abbey as a joke. The monk became accidentally famous, then deliberately silent. Academic debate. Some historians argue these talking wells were manifestations of communal hope, projecting wisdom into deep, unknowable places. Others believe such stories reflect clever use of natural acoustics, underground springs, or simply a collective desire for mystery in a world without much explanation. But back to your well. By week's end, the entire village has heard rumors. You didn't mean to spread it, it just slipped out. Possibly during bread celebration day. Possibly after a little too much fermented carrot cider. Now, every morning there's a line. Villagers bring riddles offerings, and in one case, a chicken with mystic aura written on its feathers. The well accepts some riddles. Others it ignores. When it answers, it's eerily accurate. When it's silent, it somehow judges you. Henrietta tries to stump it with "what snorts eats boots" and doesn't pay rent. The well laughs for 17 seconds. Henrietta is not amused. Then something stranger happens. One morning the well says, "You already know the answer. Now ask the right question." You frown. The villagers pause. "What does it mean?" asks Odette. You shrug. "I think it wants to be challenged." So you ask, "Why are you speaking?" It replies, "Because you've been listening." That's unhelpfully poetic. You press further. "But how are you speaking?" echoes, it says. "Old ones, worn into the stones. Memory has roots." You spend the afternoon scribbling theories. Elder Thibault insists it's the spirits of old villagers returning to offer wisdom. Guillaume thinks it's wind trapped in the stones like musical cheese. You're more practical. You lower a lantern into the well. You see no speakers, no hidden monks, no signs of mischievous plumbing. But you do see something carved deep in the stone. A spiral, tiny, repeating, ancient. You sketch it, show it to Colette. She frowns. That's not a symbol, she says. It's a sentence. She reads it slowly. "All things forgotten will speak again." Henrietta blinks. You return at dusk. Alone. You ask the well, "What was forgotten?" It replies, "What matters most." You ask, "What's that?" It says, "Not bread, not pigs, not riddles." Then it's silent, and you realize it's you. Not you specifically, but people like you, the ordinary ones. The ones whose names aren't in scrolls, or ballads, or illuminated manuscripts. The ones who tended fields, fixed fences, lost shoes, and remembered the cows' birthdays. Maybe the well remembers for them. Maybe you're just listening for the first time. That night, the village holds a listening festival. It's basically an excuse to gather around the well sip root beer and tell stories. The well says nothing, it just listens. You think maybe that's enough. You dream of spirals, of voices curling around stone, of forgotten names whispered back into the wind. And the next morning, when you draw your bucket, it says, "Well done. Then now rest." So you do. Because even in the middle of riddles and rustling pigs and rebellious bread, sometimes the most powerful magic is simply being heard. Hey there, you made it. 15 nights. 15 strange little tales from a world of pigs, haunted bread, judgmental saints, and whispering wells. A world not so far from ours, really just muddier, louder, and slightly more superstitious about vegetables. And now, you're here, at the edge of the quiet. So take a deep breath. Let the last of the lantern light flicker in your mind. The pigs have settled. The well is quiet. Even Henrietta is curled up, snoring gently, probably dreaming of stealing someone's boots again. You've wandered through forgotten fears tonight. Not dragons, but debts. Not monsters, but mildew. The real worries of ordinary people in a time that rarely remembered them. Yet somehow, their fears echo through time. Not with thunder, but with a whisper. And you listened. You heard the cows, the wind, the silence between fence posts. You remembered them. So tonight, don't worry if you didn't save a kingdom or slay a beast. You made the bread rise. You brought home the pig. You asked the well a question, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. But for now, let it go. Close your eyes. Let the night wrap around you like a soft wool cloak, a little scratchy but warm. Let the gentle rustle of barley fields and the hum of a distant lute drift into sleep. You are safe. You are seen. You are part of the story. And that's the story. For tonight, may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.